Chapter 128, Yi Feng calls for help. Days passed, and in a blink of an eye, 2 months already passed from the incident of Prince Mo Yen. Yi Shiwen didn't join Zhuge Xingli and others and went his own way. During these 2 months, Yi Shiwen was roaming throughout the Great Yu State, wiping out large numbers of the followers of Bai Majiao, because the followers of Bai Majiao had sprouted everywhere and were attacking at various locations throughout the Great Yu State, leading to a sudden rise in requests of crushing these followers. After 100 years, misfortune again struck the Great Yu State. Not just Yi Yuan School, other major sects also sent forces to crush the rebellion of Bai Majiao. The royal clan of Great Yu State also could not help but mobilize the royal guards, a terrifying army, though the foot soldiers were only warriors of peak Hotian 9th stage but corporals were masters of Xiantian realm, and this army was called the terrifying slaughter machine of the royal clan of Great Yu State. In addition to the royal guards, Great Yu State's large military was also fully mobilized, and along with them, county soldiers, many local armies and military troops were stationed overnight, and were ordered to slaughter any Bai Majiao followers if found lurking in the nearby areas. Although the battle efficiency of Yi Shiwen was now comparable to the core disciples of Xiantian's 6th stage, but this time due to the unexpected resurfacing of Bai Majiao after 100 years, many formidable devils invaded from the Devi world during the rebellion, and Yi Shiwen repeatedly faced life and death situations during the missions while fighting them, and thanks to that his strength showed a vast progress. After training for 3 months, Yi Shiwen was simply like a reborn self of his previous self. His inner state fully consolidated at the peak of Xiantian 4th stage and his strength increased all the way to the strength of 200 dragons, and his fighting efficiency was now between the Xiantian 6th stage and Xiantian 7th stage. During these 3 months, the power technique that Yi Shiwen comprehended the most was Tyrant Body Technique. He had already comprehended its 2nd layer to the Desheng realm, and now, he also comprehended the 3rd layer and actually burnt 10,000 spirit stones in the mysterious space in the process, and results could be seen from the outline of his new sturdy and slim profile. In addition to that, Yi Shiwen also spent most of the time in understanding and practicing the coiling dragon palm inside the mysterious space. In the mysterious space, he was repeatedly practicing the profound thought of this technique over and over, although he didn't have the enough inner strength, but he could still comprehend the moves of coiling dragon palm as it totally depended on his natural talent. Regarding this martial arts technique from ancient times, perhaps, even if many talented people tried to comprehend it, they would be unable to achieve anything, but Yi Shiwen had mysterious space, and so long as there were enough spirit stones, he would be able to unravel all the secrets of coiling dragon palm, as all of its secrets would be displayed in front of him, making it very easy for him to grasp this technique. Without this mysterious space, Yi Shiwen wouldn't have been able to comprehend even a bit of this ancient power technique, and instead there was a high possibility that he would have his soul and mind destroyed by the scary thought present inherently in this technique. During the time he was practicing coiling dragon palm, Yi Shiwen spent a total of 15,000 spirit stones and finally mastered the 2nd move, Divine Dragon Flings Its Tail, to the point of having the first glimpse into its secrets. Unlike Hidden Dragon Rises from the Abyss, the 2nd move was more suited for its use in group warfare, where even one move could produce a massive explosion, as if a divine dragon flung its tail, and using this move, enemies within a large range could be attacked in one fell swoop. In a mountain village, corpses were lying everywhere throughout the village, and looking at these corpses, one could see that the vitality had been drained out of their bodies, leaving only mummified corpses on the roadside. A fight was going on in the central region of the village. A group of Bai Majiao followers were gathered around a cyan figure and trying to attack him. Shua! A long blade flashed and released a terrifying bladiki that instantly and severely chopped out towards the group of Bai Majiao followers. Bang! 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 Several Bai Majiao followers couldn't evade the attack and were split in half. Yi Ziwen's figure was just like an immortal, fast and elegant, shuttling back and forth among these followers of Bai Majiao, and wherever his figure appeared, the followers of Bai Majiao would be directly chopped into 2 halves. Yi Shiwen didn't have a favorable impression of these Bai Majiao followers, and it was obvious just from seeing how maliciously and unceasingly he was chopping them down into pieces. Puchi! Puchi. Puchi. Wherever the blade light went, flesh and blood splattered everywhere. These devils finally learned the same fear that the dead villagers would have felt while getting massacred by them, but Yi Shiwen did not give them much time to reflect on it. A terrifying blade light released out of his long blade and immediately chopped them into pieces. In a short interval of time, Yi Shiwen effortlessly beheaded each and every one of these Bai Majiao followers. Yi Shiwen relaxed and felt as if there was no end to these devils. They just kept on coming even after he continued to kill them endlessly. Resurfacing after a silent preparation for 100 years, no wonder they managed to accumulate so much strength of alarming proportions, not to mention there were a large number of Bai Majiao followers beyond the boundaries of Great Yu State. Bai Majiao was a large influence and its forces had managed to proliferate throughout the Zhen Wujia, and if their overall influence was estimated, then it was much more powerful than Yi Yuan School. Great Yu State's Bai Majiao was just one branch of the organization. Yi Shiwen finished reciting, "Send souls to the afterlife," for the dead villagers, then called his red-crowned crane and returned to Yi Yuan School. During these days, he managed to complete many missions. The rewards for these Bai Majiao-related missions were truly rich, and in just a few months, Yi Shiwen actually gained more than 3,000 spirit stones by completing these missions, although considering his current level, it was not too much, but it was not too less as well. Suddenly, a mysterious light flashed in the sky and flew directly into the summoning talisman held in his hands. This summoning talisman, into which the mysterious light just entered, was clearly a high-grade talisman and far superior to an ordinary summoning talisman he previously had. Yi Shiwen knew that this summoning talisman was very expensive, but he still bought one for 300 spirit stones and discovered that its effects were very good, far better than the previous summoning talisman. It could send messages from far distances and these messages were faster and extremely accurate. Yi Shiwen sent Zhen Yuan into the summoning talisman and a message suddenly appeared in front of him. "Little brother, the disciples of our Qianyu faction are stranded and currently trapped in Thousand Islands City, hurry up and come at once." Yi Shiwen saw that the name inscribed on the message, it was Yi Feng. Immediately after receiving the distress message from the Qianyu faction, in his mind appeared the required information about Thousand Islands City. After entering into the Xiantian realm, his body went through a metamorphosis, the brain was no exception, making him intelligent and increased the retaining capacity of the brain, far more than ordinary people. Now he could read things and would never forget them. Thousand Islands City was located on the southwest large waterfront of the Great Yu State. There were many estuaries in this place since it was located near the sea, and due to the inconsistency in the estuary formations and river flow, many small islands had formed and Thousand Island City was located on top of these islands, which were also the origin of the city. It was very far from the Yi Yuan School and he needed to rush there as soon as possible. Yi Shiwen didn't waste any time and called his red-crowned crane, jumped on its back and quickly flew in the direction of Thousand Island City. There was a boundless blue sea on the eastern waterfront of the Great Yu State, and no one knew in the end how far it spread. There were many formidable sects present in the depths of the East China Sea, and not just that, there were also many powerful demon beasts that lurked in the depths of the sea, and there were also a lot of demon beasts with great wisdom who had bounded the strength of the weak demon beasts to form a demon kingdom. On the mainland, mankind was dominant, and of course would not allow the existence of demon kingdom, but the depths of the East China Sea was the lair of demon beasts and even the true realm experts wouldn't dare to go too deep into their lair. In short, the depths of East China Sea was a very dangerous place and a forbidden place for humans, and no matter which sect someone belonged to, no one was allowed to go into the depths of East China Sea. However, contrary to what anyone would expect, in the range of 3,000 li radius from the coastline, there existed a large faction of human existence, and generally, the demon beasts didn't dare to get too close to their settlement. The red-crowned crane's speed was extremely fast, but there was a large distance to cover to reach the southwest side of the Great Yu State, and the time it would take to reach there was estimated as a full day's flight. Yi Shiwen was anxious and impatient, because he remembered that he saw a mission which stated that Thousand Island City seemed to have been captured by many followers of Bai Majiao, i.e., Yifeng and others most likely had to face a large number of Bai Majiao followers and were in imminent danger. After flying for most of the time of the day, the sky was completely camouflaged by the curtain of night, and in the distance, a city could be seen partially visible in the looming fog. Since the Thousand Islands city was located close to the sea, for more than half a year, it was generally obscured in dense fog. Originally, millions of people lived in Thousand Islands city, but at this time, there was no trace of them. Rather, under the curtain of night, terrifying intermittent roars of demon beasts could be heard from all around. Yi Shiwen jumped down from the back of his red-crowned crane, which was still flying in the air. He just landed on the island and was immediately surrounded by numerous water frog beasts, who rushed over towards him while croaking. Water frog beast was a relatively low-level aquatic demon beast, but the biggest threat was their sheer numbers when they attacked. There were a lot of water frog beasts, and even if they weren't strong individually, but when several 100,000 beasts attacked at once, they could pose a serious threat for even the most formidable experts. Most experts would choose to flee in this situation. But Yi Shiwen did not want to waste this crucial time on these water frog beasts. His whole stature rushed forward, and a sudden burst of an incredibly cold and scary qijin released out of his body. Boom! Those water frog beasts were suddenly shaken and turned into powder by the shock of terrifying qijin. In no time, Yi Shiwen freed himself from the entanglement of these water frog beasts, although they were in large numbers, but fortunately, right now, not all of them had appeared, so dealing with the current number of water frog beasts wouldn't be much of a problem for him. Yi Shiwen released a large quantity of Zhen Yuan out of his body in all directions, which spread around him, and whenever the water frog beasts tried to approach him, they would immediately collapse and turn into powder. Yi Shiwen jumped to a rooftop and rushed towards the central part of Thousand Island City, because he could sense that a huge Shin method was operating crazily in the central part of the city. Yi Shiwen estimated that if the disciples of Qian Yu faction were still alive, they were most probably inside that huge Shin method. Immediately, without any hesitation, he rushed towards the central part of Thousand Island City. However, the overall structure of this Thousand Island City actually comprised of several small islands, and each of these small islands were separated by various waterways. Since Yi Shiwen couldn't fly, so he could only rush skimming on the roofs and surface of water. Chapter 129, Thousand Island City sacrificed. Yi Shiwen soon arrived at the central part of Thousand Island City, where he saw a huge Shin method unceasingly operating. There he found a large concentration of machi in the air, which was actually congealing this huge Shin method. Brother! Yi Shiwen shouted and blew out Zhen Yuan, which sent shock waves in the air, which then immediately turned into sound waves and spread out. Although it was inferior to Luo Yifen's skill, but here, within a radius of 10 to 20 miles, anyone could clearly hear his shout. After transforming the Zhen Qi inside his body into Zhen Yuan, Yi Shiwen had become so formidable that even his shout turned into a great roar and proliferated through the atmosphere like a sonic wave weapon. A sharp burst of screams of night owls spread everywhere, followed by a flock of night owls dropping from the dark sky while screaming pitifully. They had been killed by the sonic waves released from Yi Shiwen's shout. Little brother, we are here. Yifeng's voice finally reached him. This time, he didn't come to kill demon beasts or followers of Bai Majiao, but to find Yifeng and the others, and he must hurry up and find them as quickly as possible. Furthermore, looking at the strengths of Yifeng and the others, it could be said they weren't very formidable, but also couldn't be killed so easily. Yi Shiwen was just hoping that a true master had not assumed personal command of the Bai Majiao stronghold in Thousand Island City. After hearing the voice of Yifeng, Yi Shiwen was suddenly overjoyed and shouted immediately, Brother, wait a minute, I am coming. Yi Shiwen's stature shuttled in the direction from where Yifeng's voice originated, and was about to tear Zhen method with his bare hands, but suddenly, a large number of Huanma appeared to block his way, along with Bai Majiao followers, and some great devils also mixed in with them. All of these Huanma were in the Xiantian realm. Bai Majiao followers were also at the Xiantian 4th stage or Xiantian 5th stage, and not just that, even many of those great devils were adults, i.e., they were at Xiantian 6th stage. There were some great devil captains, mixed in the crowd, to command the other great devils, and strength of these captains was very high. Jia, it was really a good decision to trap the disciples of Yi Yuan school here. Now we can expect that the disciples of Yi Yuan school will keep on coming to save their comrades, and then we will kill them all. A great devil licked his lips with its scarlet tongue and said with a cruel smile on his face. When Yi Shiwen heard this, he finally understood why Yi Feng was able to send a distress message through his summoning talisman. So it was plan of these cunning devils all along to lure other disciples of Yi Yuan school and kill them. However, how could there be so many devil race and Bai Majiao followers at one place? It seemed like this should be a very important stronghold of Bai Majiao. At this time, countless thoughts flew into his mind. It was obvious that at present, he was standing in front of a huge trap which was set to attract disciples of Yi Yuan school. However, even so, there was no other way to save Yi Feng and the others. He had no other choice but to fall into the trap himself and look for Yi Feng and the others and then formulate a plan to get out of this trap. You devil bastards! Yi Shiwen shouted, then took a step and his figure turned into a streamer and vanished, and the very next instant, his figure appeared high in the sky, right above the Zhen method. While he was in the air, he chopped out his long blade and instantly released a 10 meters long daomang that immediately rushed towards Zhen method. Bang! 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 The Huanma devils who tried to block this huge and terrifying daoguang were instantly chopped into pieces. Boom! A 10 meters long terrifying daoguang smashed into the huge Zhen method. The Zhen method shook violently but didn't collapse. From the deepest part of the Zhen method, came a burst of strange laughter. Apparently Yi Ziwen's blade attack alarmed a formidable devil who was currently far away. In the deepest parts of the Zhen method, stood a huge specter, so huge that even the houses at his side appeared somewhat tiny in comparison. His eyes were like a pair of huge lanterns in general, and right now, he seemed to be keeping a close eye on a huge spiraling vortex which was right in front of him. From this vortex, waves of cold and sinister machi was unceasingly coming out, and every once in a while, a Huanma or a great devil would come out as well. Honorable Devil Commander, a Xiantian 6th stage disciple of Yi Yuan school has arrived. At this time, a great devil walked next to the huge specter and informed him about Yi Ziwen's arrival. Just one. Well, better than nothing. The huge specter said, and his voice came out like the sound of a mighty bell in general. Our aim should be to kill as many of these humans as we can. The more humans die the better for our plans, and our plan has just begun, but make sure that those kids trapped in Zhen method do not die. We will continue to use them to attract more and more experts. The huge specter laughed and said. A lot of Huanma and great devils had surrounded Yi Shiwen, as well as those followers of Bai Majiao, and their dense and gloomy aura completely enveloped him. Yi Shiwen shouted loudly, then shot his palm, and immediately, a coiling dragon roared violently and soared high in the sky. This coiling dragon was made up of Zhen Yuan, and a part of its long body was coiled around Yi Shiwen to protect him. This coiling dragon held the power of authentic dragon qi, which instantly went berserk, and some of the weak Huanma and many night owls were instantly annihilated by the dragon qi. Machi was the darkest form of yin energy in the world, whereas dragon qi was its nemesis, because dragons were said to be the rulers of heaven and earth and were noble beings that possessed mighty yang energy in the form of dragon qi. The small and weak devils were swept by dragon qi and immediately decimated. When the formidable great devils bumped into dragon qi, their bodies suddenly caught fire and started to burn violently, causing unbearable burning pain. Yi Shiwen was protecting himself by surrounding his body with the dragon qi of the coiling dragon, because right now, this coiling dragon was just like a big disaster in the eyes of those devils. In the past, if Yi Shiwen had resorted to hidden dragon rises from the abyss, then using it once would have consumed 10% of his Xiantianjin qi, but now that the Xiantianjin qi energy within his body had been transformed into Xiantianjin yuan, the consumption rate was almost negligible. And now that the Zhen Yuan consumption rate was negligible, he could finally use hidden dragon rises from the abyss for longer periods of time. Earlier, this move was his secret one-shot kill method, but now he could use it as much as he wanted to, which could be considered his largest harvest during his last session of training. However, the Zhen Yuan consumption rate for Divine Dragon flings its tail was still large, and using it even once consumed half of the Zhen Yuan from his body and couldn't be used frequently. Just like earlier when he couldn't use Hidden Dragon Rises from the Abyss due to high Zhen Qi consumption rate. Using the Dragon Qi armor, Yi Shiwen managed to safeguard himself in the Sea of Devils. The devils couldn't get close to Yi Shiwen because the Dragon Qi that was surrounding him. Some of the devils tried to approach him and caught fire and started screaming incessantly. Yi Shiwen immediately brandished his long blade and displayed his profound blade skills by beheading all of the devils who had been injured by Dragon Qi. They simply couldn't escape his blade and were split in half. The coiling dragon, which was coiled around Yi Ziwen's body at this moment, seemed to be made up of pure Lingqi, and whenever it used its claws to grab devils, their bodies would instantly explode. Earlier, Yi Shiwen wasn't aware of this, that Dragon Qi was actually the nemesis of devils. He just noticed that when devils at Xiantian 5th stage and less came close to him, their bodies instantly caught fire and they started to scream, giving an easy opportunity to Yi Shiwen to behead them. Xiantian's 6th and 7th stage devils were not a match of Yi Shiwen, who was relying on Dragon Qi to protect his body. Whenever formidable devils and great devils tried to approach him, they were first injured by the Dragon Qi, then chopped down by Yi Ziwen's long blade. Even great devil captains, who were at the Xiantian 8th stage, couldn't get close to his body. But Yi Shiwen also knew that he wouldn't be able to endure like this for too long. The consumption rate of Zhen Yuan was just too great in order to kill these devils, and even if the Zhen Yuan within his body was extremely vigorous and profound, far more vigorous than an ordinary master of Xiantian's 6th stage, but he was still unable to withstand such a high consumption rate. There were just too many of these devils. Perhaps handling these numbers was not a big deal for a true master, but for Yi Shiwen, this was too much. He didn't know where these devils were coming out from because they just kept on coming. There was simply no end to them, which was quite astonishing. Yi Shiwen secretly guessed in his heart that this was probably not just a stronghold of Bai Majiao and was something else entirely. Perhaps they opened up a portal to the devil world and were continuously sending devils from the other side, otherwise how could there be an endless number of devils? Generally speaking, if so many devils were being sent from the devil world, then it must have been discovered by now. Yi Shiwen became more anxious as he understood that he couldn't delay anymore and waste his energy on these endless numbers of devils. He shot his palm and immediately, a dragon roared and flew out of his palm, then its two formidable claws pierced into the Zhen method and tore a hole in it. Whoosh! Seeing the gap in the Zhen method, Yi Shiwen dived in like a drill and wormed his way inside the Zhen method. When the devils saw him forcing his way into the Zhen method, they also rushed after him to squeeze in, only to give up in the end when the Zhen method replenished itself and was completed once again. Yi Shiwen searched inside the Zhen method for a moment and finally found the members of Qianyu faction, and at this time, they were surrounded by many devils whose attacks were being constantly repelled by the magical sound flute of Zhang Sun Yuan. Yi Shiwen took a look and saw Yi Feng, Yi Rushua, Zhang Yang, Zhang Sun Yuan, Yan Qiliang, and other familiar people. Almost all of his friends were here, but he noticed that all of them were the masters of Xiantian realm. Could it be that this was some sort of group activity of the top members who were also collectively considered the backbone of Qianyu faction? If these people were annihilated, then Qianyu faction could basically be considered as finished. Brother, why have you come here? Yi Shiwen approached and asked. It's entirely my fault. I did not consider the safety of everyone and thought this would be a small matter. Yi Feng sighed and said. How can this be just your fault? All of us made the plan together to come here, but we never thought that these insidious devils could be so cunning. Yan Qiliang immediately said in a loud voice. Then Yi Shiwen heard the whole matter from Yi Rushua and finally came to know about the sequence of events. Several days ago, a disciple of Qianyu faction heard the news that his hometown, Thousand Islands City, suffered an invasion from Bai Majiao, so he decided to go back and inspect. Later Yan Qiliang came to know about this matter from him and wanted everyone to participate in this plan and turned this into the first group activity of Qianyu faction since its establishment, but taking into account the current turmoil and danger outside, he decided to bring only Xiantian level masters with him. According to the information they had received, it just looked like a simple matter of attack by the followers of Bai Majiao, so they did not mind, but they didn't know about the actual danger until they arrived here and discovered that Thousand Island City was empty and everyone in the entire city had been massacred. Over 1 million people had been turned into blood sacrifices by the devils. And while they were trying to escape, they got trapped in this Jin method. What did you say? Everyone in the city has been sacrificed. Yi Shiwen held his breath and asked in surprised tone. Chapter 130, Reinforcement from Yi Yuan School, what did you say? Everyone in the city has been sacrificed. Yi Shiwen held his breath and asked in surprised tone. Yi Shiwen could not hold his surprise. After all, the population of over 1 million people lived in a big city like Thousand Island City. And since more than 1 million people had been massacred to be used as blood sacrifice by the devils, a terrifying thing was soon going to be born at this place. Just looking at the resentment of 1 million lives that had been slaughtered as blood sacrifices, it could be imagined how horrifying this situation could turn into. The dignified-looking Yi Feng nodded and said, although I do not know what these devils are actually trying to do, but it can only be something extraordinary and ominous. Zhang Sunyuan, Yan Qiliang and the others also nodded at Yi Feng's point. Although their current strength was nothing in comparison to the formidable masters present in the main sect, but they were originally considered as the elites in their respective sub-schools and other outer major forces, so their experience was not bad, though they did not know what the devil race was trying to do here in Thousand Island City, but it was certainly not a good thing. It's entirely my fault, I should have thought with a clear mind before sending you a distress message. Yi Feng said in a somewhat self-blaming tone, even your arrival is unable to change anything, rather yet another person fell into enemy's trap. It's my fault to not think this though properly. Brother, it's not your fault. Yi Shiwen shook his head and said, it's the plan of those devils all along to use you all as hostage and attract Yi Yuan School's disciples. Yi Shiwen told them everything he previously heard from the devils, and after hearing that, the complexions of many disciples suddenly paled, because if that really was the case, then these devils were certainly too vicious and could not be taken lightly. They were too cunning and deceitful. Then what should we do now? A disciple said in a worried voice. This is our only chance. Yi Shiwen immediately said in a loud voice and attracted everyone's attention, these devil bastards are definitely planning something big, as it takes a lot of time to set up such an elaborate trap. They even have the audacity to dare and ambush the disciples of Yi Yuan School, and I think they are relying on the strength of some high-level monster, because I saw Machi soaring in the sky and there should be a formidable great devil who has assumed personal command of this setup. We have been lucky so far, but who knows what happens later, therefore we still have a chance of survival, and that is to escape from here when a formidable expert comes from our school, then we can take advantage of the chaos and run away. Yi Shiwen said this confidently because he knew this trap would be the main reason why Yi Yuan School would send a formidable expert, because this devil's setup was creating too much disturbance and was very loud, and there were a lot of formidable experts in Yi Yuan School. A major power like Yi Yuan School wouldn't sit idly when such a loud devil setup was working out in open in Zhenwujie. However, at this time, this plan was going to work only if these devils do not change their mind to keep the hostages alive, because if devil race decided to grind them to death, then it would be an easy job for them. The situation looked dangerous because a lot of devils were trying to encircling their group, as if planning a large-scale attack. Hidden dragon rises from the abyss. Yi Shiwen shouted, and a coiling dragon roared violently and suddenly came out of his palm and soared into the sky. Its roars resounded everywhere. Then the huge body of this dragon coiled around Yi Zaiwen's body to give him protection. Yi Zaiwen's long blade dance released Daoguang, which rushed towards the surrounding devils and simply chopped them down like vegetables. They just couldn't get close to him, and occasionally, a few who somehow managed to get close to him were caught by the claws of the coiling dragon and exploded. This coiling dragon had a soul and didn't need specific commands from Yi Shiwen and attacked the nearby devils on its own. Brother Yi is insanely strong. The crowd of disciples from Qianyu faction was baffled by Yi Ziwen's insane display of strength. It was like he was the invincible god of death for these devils. They suddenly came to understand how Yi Shiwen had been able to breach inside the Zhen method even when he was surrounded by numerous devils. Now they knew that devil race trapped them in here in order to attract the disciples of Yi Yuan school, so it was obvious that they would set layers after layers of trap in case core disciples were to come to save their comrades, but Yi Shiwen, who was not even a core disciple, was able to break through all those traps and that too totally unscathed. Yi Ziwen's performance was little too vigorous, and the most important question was just what kind of power technique did he practice that whenever the devils tried to approach him, they either ended up getting wounded or die. They could almost feel life coming out from this coiling dragon that was coiled around Yi Ziwen's body, and they mistakenly thought that this coiling dragon wasn't made up of energy, but was an actual dragon, the one to rule the heaven and earth. What kind of power technique is this? This question cropped up in the hearts of many disciples, because this power technique was simply too flamboyant and completely insane. Their own power techniques could be considered as absolutely authentic, but they could never be compared with such a terrifying power technique which was easily eradicating these devils that didn't seem to have any means to fight back. Just where he found such an incredible power technique which seemed like the true nemesis of these devils, making them completely hopeless in the face of this coiling dragon, as they didn't know how to fight an opponent they couldn't even approach. Zhang Sun Yuan occasionally played the spiritual tool called magical sound flute which made these disciples to exclaim, and then there was Yi Ziwen's insane power technique, coiling dragon palm, which was constantly shocking them. They were even more shocked and they suddenly noticed that Yi Ziwen's attacks were releasing Zhen Yuan. So, Yi Shiwen actually transformed Zhen Yuan, but that was simply inconceivable because it meant that he was now a Xiantian 6th stage expert. There were strange complexions on the faces of these disciples because they suddenly realized that Yi Ziwen's cultivation growth had simply approached a terrifying speed. When they first met Yi Shiwen, although he was somewhat famous, but his strength was not comparable to Zhang Sun Yuan, Yan Qiliang and other strongest disciples, but during the past 6 months, he actually managed to surpass them by such an extent, and not just surpass, he actually managed to transform Zhen Yuan. This cultivation growth speed made them to feel kind of helpless. Among Yi Feng, Yan Qiliang, Zhang Sun Yuan and other members of Qianyu faction, the strongest among them had just reached Xiantian 4th stage. Although they had confidence that in a few years, they would be able to reach the peak of Xiantian 5th stage, but after a few years, just what kind of cultivation level would Yi Shiwen be having? Just thinking about this made them to gasp. Yi Feng was looking at Yi Shiwen with a complicated look in his eyes, thinking in his heart that he must protect his little brother at all times, but the situation reversed and now he was being rescued by his little brother. His little brother disappeared without a trace few months ago and had now been replaced by an extremely formidable and brave figure. Though Yi Feng still thought of Yi Shiwen as a little brother who needed protection, but Yi Shiwen was capable enough to act independently and could take care of himself. He was not afraid of Zhen Yuan drying up from overconsumption, because in the event of such a situation, he could draw back to rest, swallow a medicinal pill and replenish the consumed Zhen Yuan in his body. For others, the area inside the Zhen method was full of machi, and they were suffering to breathe, but for Yi Shiwen, it was no different from the outside world, because the mysterious space in his mind could convert the machi into energy which he could then use to enhance his cultivation. This kind of place where he continuously needed to fight was the best place to enhance his cultivation. In a blink of an eye, 1 day, 2 days and finally 3 days passed. Yi Shiwen and other members of Qianyu faction stayed inside the Zhen method for a total of 3 days, and during these 3 days, they got sufficient time to determine a lot of things. Although, during these 3 days, they moved towards the depths of Zhen method to avoid devil encounters, but they could still feel that somebody was frequently attacking the dome-shaped Zhen method from outside, which caused the Zhen method to vibrate violently, but apparently without success, and soon the vibrations would disappear. Obviously, not everyone possessed the insane strength like Yi Shiwen, who was able to force his way into the Zhen method. In the beginning when these attacks first started to impact on the Jin method, then everyone was excited, but now, they slowly got used to them. On this day, suddenly the mochi inside the entire Jin method began to become violent and flow frantically in all directions. Everyone was surprised for a moment because they didn't expect what was happening in front of their eyes, because before, even some Xiantian 9th stage masters had forced their way into the enemy territory, but even their strongest attacks had been unable to create so dramatic fluctuations inside the Jin method. These fluctuations proved that the Jin method was crazily operating and replenishing itself in order to resist the attacks from outside. Rumble. The entire Jin method violently shook like never before. A look of joy appeared on the faces of everyone. Now it was certain that a strong figure finally appeared to save them, increasing their chances of going out, which was naturally good news for them. Yi Xuan suddenly felt that the entire Jin method spread throughout the central part of Thousand Island City instantly cracked, and was immediately secretly speechless with admiration, too horrifying, and this expert's strength was probably even more than that true master, Luo Yifan. It could be said that the strength of this expert was much larger than the strengths of ordinary true disciples. However, the delighted expressions on the faces of everyone suddenly turned serious. After all, they were still not out of the woods and this was their only chance to get out of this mess, but Devil Race was waiting outside, and could give a vicious blow to them any time. Listen everyone, we must pay attention and be careful of the sneak attacks of these devil bastards. Yan Chiling shouted and everyone nodded as they themselves knew that this was probably the most critical moment. Rumble. There was yet another terrifying explosion. All of a sudden, a large gap opened up on the Jin method, revealing the gray sky through the gap while the whole method began to vacillate. The sunlight projected inside through the gap. Everyone looked up towards the gap and actually saw an expert clad in golden robes, and there was double-edged golden sword in his hand, clearly visible handsome facial features, and even the color of his hair and eyes was actually golden, giving him the appearance of a golden god of war. An invincible breath was surging around him, revealing his horrifying aura. At this moment, in the eyes of everyone, with the sunlight coming from behind him, he appeared like a celestial being, and it seemed as if he was the only one to exist between the heaven and earth. Bold devils, you really have great courage. Quickly hand over the disciples of my Yi Yuan school and I will leave your whole corpse intact. The Golden Man spoke, which resounded throughout Thousand Island City like a horrifying thunderclap. Some weak Hotian realm weak devils and by Majiao disciples were instantly killed by these horrifying sonic waves. One could see that his cultivation level was far more than that of Luo Yifan, almost 100 times stronger. You really talk big. Could it be that humans these days are usually so arrogant? A mighty voice came from the deepest part of the Jin method. It just so happens that my devil race lacks a formidable human soul. At this time between the speeches, a huge specter came out from the deepest parts of the Jin method and flew up into the air. The devil aura of this huge specter was so dark and overwhelming that a large portion of the bright sunny sky was instantly obscured by massive dark clouds. The strength of this huge specter was equally matched with the strength of the Golden Man. In this huge specter's eyes flashed an ominous red light and he seemed just like an ancient devil god who had come back to life. He conveniently grasped his claws and the space began to fluctuate violently under the influence of his sharp claws, which was an exceptionally terrifying sight to behold. The two peerless gods of war were on the verge of a deadly battle. Chapter 131, Qi Fifan. The strength of these two peerless masters was not something Yi Feng and the other Xiantian realm experts could hold a candle to. The essence and blood soul of a peerless master are 100 times more useful than thousands of these mediocre people. The sinister grin appeared on the face of the huge specter, which appeared incomparably cruel. The mochi dispersed out of his body, in which the souls of dead people could be clearly seen. It was a gigantic devil, at least 5 meters tall, with its whole body covered with black scales, for limbs like humans but had deadly sharp claws, a long tail dancing on his back like the tail of a tiger on hunt. Everyone suddenly recognized that it was actually a giant devil, one of the various species found in Devil World. Some of the features of a giant devil were its exceptionally huge build, and it also possessed great strength and were considered a part of the main force of Devil Army. It was said that compared to the great devils, the cannon fodder of devil race, the adults of giant devils could grow up to 4 meters and possess strength no less than the masters of true realm. And this huge specter was definitely more than 5 meters tall and seemed like the leader of other giant devils and possessed tremendous strength compared to other giant devils. Ominous large blood Jin method, you filthy devil, you actually blood sacrificed the entire city. The golden man said in a cold voice, it seems that you are doing something extraordinary, that you actually don't even do it quietly in secret, but you do it on such a grand scale just to attract the disciples of my Yuan school. Jia Jia. The giant devil leader strangely laughed and said, you guessed it right, and I never thought that my plan will attract such a peerless expert like you, but it just so happens that your arrival has saved me a lot of trouble. The golden man was looking straight in the eyes of the huge specter, but there was no fear in his eyes, he was simply like a golden god of war, who came back to life. Both his eyes were looking around observing the situation and discovered that innumerable devils had been deployed on the periphery of the large Shin method. However, he was not afraid, on the contrary, there was a trace of excitement on his face. Then, suddenly the golden man laughed loudly and said, you filthy beast, this chief Yifan has killed too many devils before, but so far, I have yet to kill a giant devil, it just so happens that I am going to offer you as a sacrifice to my sword. What, he is chief Yifan? Yan Chiling said aloud in a surprised tone. Everyone was immediately shocked and they came to know that the golden figure in the sky was actually Chief Yifan. The latent information about the great achievements of this Chief Yifan suddenly emerged in the mind of Yi Shiwen. Chief Yifan was truly worthy of being called out of the ordinary. He was truly a legendary expert, and even in the sea of geniuses present in Yuan school, he was considered a legend, simply a myth. Since childhood, he started practicing the sect's martial arts, and his cultivation almost rose dramatically at a rocketing speed. Then in a short time, he broke from the Xiantian realm into the true realm, defeated numerous enemies, and now, no one knew what his current cultivation level actually was. It was said that he was at the 8th stage of Truth Realm and some people said that he was actually at the 9th stage of Truth Realm. There were many rumors that Chief Yifan had already entered half a step into the Legendary Realm. Legendary Realm was the realm just above the Truth Realm, and the superiors of various peaks in the Yuan school were in the Legendary Realm. Chief Yifan's cultivation level was suspected to be very close and almost approaching the Legendary Realm, and in the future, he would surely enter into the Legendary Realm and compete for the position of the leader disciple, the most popular position given to one of the 4 strongest disciples of Yuan school. And although both Chief Yifan and Luo Yifan were the masters of the Truth Realm, but Chief Yifan's strength was on a whole another level in comparison to the strength of Luo Yifan, who was at most at the 1st stage or 2nd stage of Truth Realm. Both were in the Truth Realm, but the gap between them was like heaven and earth. It was said that the strength gap among the masters of different stages was much bigger in the Truth Realm than it was in the Xiantian realm. This expert was definitely a myth, a legendary character. And that giant devil leader obviously couldn't look down on him, because both sides could be described as evenly matched, and once they would start to fight, it could be considered as a stunning battle. Yi Shiwen didn't hesitate for any longer and said to the disciples of Qianyu faction, once they start to fight, I am afraid even the heaven and earth would be shattered, we must seize this opportunity to escape. All of the disciples nodded because they were also thinking the same thing. That giant devil leader made the first move, his big hand grasping toward the void and suddenly grabbed a giant trident from the void, then struck towards Chief Yifan, and in a flash, it directly punctured the space, and in the next second, it appeared in front of Chief Yifan. The long sword in Chief Yifan's hand struck out a golden sun-like sword key which moved forward towards the incoming attack. Boom! The machi and sword key fiercely collided into each other and the space seemed to vibrate like a piece of paper, rapidly shaking up and down, and the fluctuations produced spread a commotion among the entire devil army. In the sky, their battle had just started. Both of them were peerless masters and stood at the peak of Truth Realm. Each and every one of their moves looked exceptionally simple, but inside these simple moves, the principles of the Truth Realm were properly assimilated. Under the attacks of the two peerless masters, the surrounding air was constantly exploding, and as the fight between the two became quicker, their overall destructive power gradually spread throughout the entire Thousand Island city, and at this rate, it seemed that the whole city would ultimately be destroyed in the burning time of half an incense stick. When such a high-level battle between the two peerless masters started to heat up in the sky, the disciples of the Yuan school took this opportunity to have a glimpse at this battle because they might never get an opportunity to witness such a battle in this lifetime. Suddenly all of the disciples were totally mesmerized by the battle, although they were just watching the two fight, but for the masters at the level of Qi Fifan, each and every one of their moves contained the essence of martial arts, and they were directly looking at the flawless display of martial arts and devil arts, giving them an impulse to enhance their own cultivation as soon as possible to be able to display the same level of martial arts. Yi Shiwen also looked very ecstatic and thrilled, but compared to others, his ecstasy was completely different. He began to crazily burn the spirit stones in his storage ring and injected the produced lingqi into the mysterious space. The mysterious space began to capture the scene that Yi Shiwen was watching at the moment, which seemed as if the silk was being spun into a cocoon essence and pouring into his mind. Yi Shiwen also had a fascinated look on his face while just from watching the elaborate fight of those two masters, making him have a feeling of having a breakthrough from the sudden epiphany. The sound of numerous shouts abruptly resounded from the periphery of the Zhen method and a large troop of devils rushed towards Yi Shiwen. They were probably thinking that now that their great leader would most probably kill and consume Qi Fifan, then these Yuan school disciples no longer had any value as hostages, and they must strike Yi Shiwen, who was the most dangerous entity among these disciples. "Begin, everyone rush outside!" Yi Shiwen shouted and led the way. Almost all of the attacking devils were aiming for Yi Shiwen, but none of them were going close to him because of the coiling dragon coiled around his body. All of the 4 limbs and 1 tail of the coiling dragon was brandished and fended off the devils coming towards the group. With Yi Shiwen on the front, those weak and small devils were instantly obliterated, and coupled with the might of his long blade, Yi Feng and other disciples followed after Yi Shiwen through the narrow opening made towards the Zhen method's periphery. "Kill!" Yi Shiwen shouted loudly, and his palm blasted, and another coiling dragon flew out of his palm towards the Zhen method, waving its strong 4 limbs, and tore a gap in the Zhen method with its sharp claws. The disciples of the Qianyu faction first dived out of this gap, and in the end, Yi Shiwen also jumped out, and as soon as he came out, the Zhen method immediately restored, and the devils on the inside didn't get a chance to come out after Yi Shiwen, and were left inside the Zhen method shrieking angrily. However, there weren't many devils outside the Zhen method, because a majority of the devils stationed outside the Zhen method had been annihilated by the fallout of the battle between the two peerless masters. Just when they came out of the Zhen method, suddenly, a wave of terrifying fallout rolled towards them. This was actually nothing for Yi Shiwen, because his body had become extremely formidable by practicing an extremely powerful power technique, tyrant body technique, turning his body like that of a tyrant, so this fallout couldn't hurt him. But not counting Yi Shiwen, if it was some other master of the Xiantian realm, then facing this terrifying fallout would be dangerous. Fortunately, at this critical time, Zhang Sun Yuan took out the magical flute, and the power of this pseudo-spiritual tool displayed itself and blocked the terrifying fallout. After the crowd ran for a distance of almost 100 li, they finally stopped after wearing themselves out by running at the fastest pace achievable, but at the moment, all of them had rejoicing faces at the moment. They probably thought that this time, they would not be able to escape, but they not just escaped, they did it with 0 casualties. Although there was a major role of Qi Fifan to play in their successful escape, but it became possible only under the leadership of Yi Shiwen, who was leading and defending them from the devils all the time. If Yi Shiwen was not there, they probably would have been dead a few days ago, not to mention, without Yi Shiwen, they wouldn't have been able to face the huge attack of devils near the periphery of Zhen method a while ago, and coming out of the Zhen method would have been impossible as well. Therefore all of them were looking at Yi Shiwen with their eyes filled with gratitude, especially the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School felt even more gratitude towards him, because it could be said that Yi Shiwen had repeatedly saved them at multiple occasions, and without him, they probably would have died some time ago before this incident. After this incident, although these people suffered mental stress, but after spending the last few days under the leadership of Yi Shiwen, they gave him a tacit recognition as the elder of Qianyu faction. Although Yi Shiwen was originally an elder of Qianyu faction, but there were a lot of people who were not actually convinced because Yi Shiwen was almost regardless of the daily matters of Qianyu faction, so how could such a person receive the position of an elder? But now it looked completely different because Yi Shiwen would often appear at the most critical time to save the members of the faction, in the most critical time, which was the most important thing than handling the daily matters of Qianyu faction. After surviving today, the disciples of Qianyu faction fully and finally recognized Yi Shiwen as their leader. Hurry up and go everyone, otherwise it would be bothersome if those devils came after us. Yi Shiwen said. Little brother, won't you come with us? Yi Rushua asked in a worried tone. You all go first. I must take care of a small matter before I leave this place. Yi Shiwen said. Everyone thought that Yi Shiwen was the strongest among them and so effortlessly brought them out of the lair of devils, so long as he didn't bump into that giant devil leader, handling other devils should not be tough for him. After all, everyone had one of two secrets, so when Yi Shiwen said that he had a matter to handle, no one tried to ask him about the details. After the group left, Yi Shiwen used restraining breath technique and suddenly began twining the layer after layer of mochi around his body, then put on the black cloak of a Bai Majiao follower he caught earlier. Looking from afar, he simply looked like a follower of Bai Majiao. Without wasting any time, Yi Shiwen immediately turned around and retraced the same route he came from. Chapter 132, Tianyuan Mirror. After Yi Shiwen practiced restraining breath technique to the Desheng realm, now, he could simulate a variety of breaths, and could even imitate the body to some extent, but of course just imitate, not the genuine imitation, but at this time of chaos, he would be able to deceive those devils quite easily. At this time, a chaos was spread everywhere due to the terrifying force of collisions between the two peerless masters, and the destruction caused by their battle was absolutely shattering the heaven and earth. Yi Shiwen traced back the same route to go back and saw that the entire Devil Jin method had begun to operate, and an endless amount of blood qi also began to permeate and fill the air. This blood qi was produced as a result of the slaughter of humans, who were blood sacrificed in the Thousand Islands city by the devil race. Once smelled, this environment filled with blood qi induced a disgusting taste along with nausea. Yi Shiwen thought in his heart that he absolutely couldn't let them succeed, otherwise it would lead to the occurrence of a big disaster. Yi Shiwen mixed in with a devil troop and went straight inside the Devil Jin method along with them because now he was disguised as a follower with mochi covering his body, so he was not rejected by the Devil Jin method and easily went inside. After wearing the cloak of a Bai Majiao follower, Yi Shiwen looked just like the other followers of Bai Majiao without any visible difference, and none of those devils could see through his disguise. Yi Shiwen went all the way towards the deeper parts of the Devil Jin method, and after reaching there, he found a way leading to an underground cave. He was about to go inside when 4 great devils blocked his path. Lowly human, you crossed the line. This is not the place where you humans can set foot on so casually. A great devil said. Yi Shiwen thought that inside the devil army, it seemed the status of the followers of Bai Majiao was quite low, and they were at least close to the bottom ranks, possibly belonging to the pawn class. However, Yi Shiwen was not in a mood to slow down and immediately chopped out his long blade. A dazzling blade light was released and rushed towards that great devil that was not prepared for this sudden attack and was instantly beheaded. The remaining 3 great devils also couldn't react because they didn't expect a lowly Bai Majiao follower to suddenly attack them. Yi Shiwen instantly chopped out 3 blade shadows of Missing Moon Beheader and the 3 great devils were chopped into pieces. It was good for Yi Shiwen that they weren't paying attention and he was able to behead them so easily, otherwise, his only option would have been to resort to coiling dragon palm and it would have caused bigger commotion near the entrance to the underground cave. Yi Shiwen no longer disguised as a follower of Bai Majiao, but used the restraining breath technique once again to disguise as a great devil. Although he took the form of a great devil, but he had to assimilate huge amount of mochi, enough that he should be able to fool those of the devil race. Yi Shiwen went all the way down the tunnel, and was surprised to find more and more great devils in the underground cave. While rounds after rounds of complementary blast waves of the fight between the giant devil leader and Chief Fifan was still undergoing above the ground, pretending as a great devil, Yi Shiwen smoothly went through the tunnel without any difficulty. Yi Shiwen went all the way down, and after some time, he saw a giant pool of blood, and a steady stream of endless amount of blood was flowing into this pool. Yi Shiwen didn't know where this flow of blood was coming from and being injected into the blood pool. The endless amount of blood was boiling inside the pool and he could clearly feel the blood qi coming out of it. Yi Shiwen could also hear the grieving and resentment-filled screams of people coming from the blood. Even the warriors who practiced Xiedao would reject these resentments and grievances present in the atmosphere around the giant blood pool, but at the same time, the devil race did not care, rather they tried to increase the amount of such grievances in order to increase the power of blood sacrifice. I will eradicate these beasts. Although, after spending so much time in this world, it could be said that Yi Shiwen had become used to life and death, but when he saw this scene, he couldn't control his anger which instantly soared to the heavens. He finally understood why people of Zhenwujia held extreme hatred for the devil race. So, it was actually not a war between two warrior groups who practiced different types of martial arts, this was actually a war between two races, where it had come to the situation of you die, I live. If these devils were not killed off entirely then they would most likely enslave human race, or turn them into blood food. There was no other option left especially when devil race had always been planning to invade Zhenwujie. These two races couldn't coexist, because it was a matter of life and death. And at this time, it seemed that it was the most critical time for the Devil Zhen method, because not only the blood in the giant pool was boiling, intermittent waves of blood was also being set off waves inside the giant pool. Anyone who would look at this scene would get a chill down their spine. Then, suddenly, violent fluctuations appeared in the blood pool, and when the devils in surroundings saw this scene, they immediately and hastily withdrew away from the giant pool and didn't dare to approach. Jia Jia, this lord is finally back. Such arrogant words, but it was actually accompanied with the voice of an innocent child, and at the same time, a scarlet-colored mirror tumbled out from the rolling waves of blood along with a small childlike devil, dark little body, two long horns on his head, a pair of wings flapping on his back, and a tail was constantly dancing behind him. Looking from afar, he looked exceptionally lovable. That scarlet mirror started to emit intermittent rays of light upwards and the entire cave was illuminated, which at the moment looked like a stretch of bloody world to Yi Shiwen. The devils in the surrounding were in awe and kneeled down on the ground as if trying to worship this little devil. To these devils, it seemed as if this little devil was a godlike figure. Yi Zaiwen's eyes suddenly flashed and he decided in his heart that he absolutely couldn't let this dangerous devil out of the cave. At present, he just seemed to have born in this world and this was his weakest time. If allowed to grow up, he would surely bring disaster to this world. Yi Shiwen took a step and his physique turned into a streamer, and instantly flew towards the center of the blood pool, a coiling dragon instantly coiled around his body, and the enormous vitality present in the dragon qi of the coiling dragon came in contact of the resentment lingering in the air and was instantly evaporated. He immediately chopped out his long blade releasing a bright light that instantly chopped out towards the little devil. Puchi! That little devil was instantly chopped into two halves. However immediately, the two sections of his corpse lifted up in the air, joined and the little devil was reborn again. He then suddenly shouted while pointing towards Yi Shiwen, "You lowly great devil, how dare you raise your hands against a deity, are you trying to rebel?" Then suddenly the scarlet mirror on his side shone and released rays of light and Yi Zaiwen's body was instantly exposed to this light. The coiling dragon, coiled around Yi Zaiwen's body, suddenly and fiercely shook up, roared loudly, and the dragon qi and blood qi began to melt each together. How is this possible? Seeing the current appearance of Yi Shiwen, the little devil suddenly gawked and was totally stunned, then he suddenly responded in a loud voice, "You are not a devil." Suddenly a wave of blood shot towards Yi Shiwen, but he jumped above the blood wave and instantly sprang towards the little devil. Capture him. That little devil shouted in a crisp voice, and listening to his command, suddenly, an endless number of devils lunged toward Yishuan. Yishuan disregarded the interference from other devils and directly rushed and arrived in front of the little devil, and in a flash, his palm turned into Qinglong-like claw and advanced towards the little devil and grabbed his head firmly. Now the little devil couldn't escape, but the scarlet mirror in his hand suddenly released terrifying blood-red rays of light towards Yishuan. Yizaiwen's other hand also turned into Qinglong-like claw, and a coiling dragon instantly shot out and blasted into the blood-red rays of light and scattered them, while at the same time, he caught the scarlet mirror in his other hand. However, this scarlet mirror was constantly exuding bloody red rays of light that continued to penetrate into the dragon chi, and the coiling dragon gradually melted and disappeared. Right after that, the sinister rays of light started to corrode the body of Yishuan, and his body was instantly covered in blood. Immediately, a terrible pain surged straight inside Yizaiwen's mind, but right at that time, the mysterious space inside his mind suddenly emitted bursts of divine rays of colorful light along Yizaiwen's arms towards that scarlet mirror. Boom! And the divine rays of colorful light actually suppressed the scarlet mirror. A cool breath spread inside his body and suddenly gave him a comfortable feeling. You lowly human, release this lord right this instant, otherwise. The little devil shouted. Shut up or I'll strangle you to death. Yishuan shouted in a cold voice, but he couldn't crush him, otherwise he would just take rebirth from the giant blood pool. If this was not the case, then Yishuan would already have slapped this arrogant little devil to death. Guided through his arm, Yizaiwen's blood flowed over the scarlet mirror under the leadership of the divine rays of colorful light, and integrated into the scarlet mirror. Yishuan suddenly got a vague feeling of being one with this scarlet mirror. No, impossible, how can this happen? How can Tianyuan mirror recognize you as its master? The little devil's complexion suddenly paled and he said in a trembling voice. Those devils had almost arrived in front of Yishuan to attack him, when at this time, suddenly, a loud explosion occurred and the roof of the cave disrupted and a huge figure severely fell from above and hit the ground, making a huge crack. Yishuan looked and saw that it was actually that giant devil leader. At this time, there were several bloody wounds on his body, the scales were ripped out of his chest area, one could see a large gaping hole in his body from where large amount of blood was continuously pouring out, and the inner flesh was also visible. And from the huge hole in the cave roof, one could see Qi Fifen's figure floating in the sky, his whole body was exuding golden light, from afar, he simply looked like a golden god of war, as if watching ants on the ground from his star-arched throne high above in the sky. Any Machi that tried to approach him would be completely swallowed by his golden Jin Yuan, which clearly displayed his extremely terrifying prowess. The difference between the strength of these peerless masters was now clearly evident. Devil bastards, prepare to die. Qi Fifen said in a cold voice. Qi Fifen's sword dazzled like a sun, releasing a terrifying sword ki which instantly came crashing down into the underground cave, and when the blood qi and resentment present inside the underground cave came in contact with this dazzling sword ki, it instantly evaporated and disappeared without a trace. The giant devil leader instantly lifted his trident up to receive the impact of the terrifying sword ki. Boom! A horrifying collision occurred and the tremendous powers of the two peerless masters instantly scattered in the entire cavern. Weak devils were annihilated instantly, whereas the formidable devils were seriously injured and were blasted away in all directions inside the cave. When this terrifying blast wave swept towards the body of Yishuan, the scarlet mirror in his hand sensed it, and it immediately released rays of red light towards the incoming blast wave and protected Yishuan. Yishuan no longer hesitated and quickly rushed, skimming all the way through the tunnel leading outside of the cave. Fortunately, the two formidable peerless masters were concentrating on the showdown and didn't notice him running away. He smoothly escaped from the cave through the underground tunnel, and this time, almost all of the devils were dead inside the tunnel. Yishuan came out of the tunnel and smoothly escaped at full speed. He stopped and relaxed only after running over 100 miles away. Chapter 133, returns to Yi Yuan School after running for over 100 li, Yi Shiwen could no longer feel the complementary blast waves of the fight between the two peerless masters. He finally relaxed and could not help but muttered, "These masters of the truth realm are really terrifying. Lowly human, do you think that they are just ordinary masters of the truth realm? That blockhead giant leader is already at the peak of 9th stage of the truth realm, whereas that human has already entered half a step into the legendary realm, otherwise how else can they cause such large-scale destruction?" The little demon held in Yi Zaiwen's hand suddenly said in a mocking manner. Yi Shiwen remembered that he was still clutching that little devil in his hand. Yi Shiwen looked towards the little devil and asked in a leisurely tone, "What is your breed, devil?" Yi Shiwen was grabbing him firmly in his hand, but he was not worried that it would resist, because a moment ago, he had noticed that it was very difficult to kill this little devil, but at the same time, it almost had no strength, or it was possible that its strength originated from that scary scarlet mirror. Yi Shiwen still couldn't completely control the scarlet mirror, but he could feel that this scarlet mirror seemed to be directly connected with his mind. Yi Shiwen couldn't figure out why this happened. This plot of suddenly getting recognized as master by dropping the blood was pure nonsense because only a spiritual tool at divine tool level or above would identify its master. Also, for the so-called getting recognized as the master of an original tool, it was necessary for an expert to condense his own Jin Yuan into the tool, and continue doing so for days and nights, while sacrificing his own training, and even after that, he would only be able to attain a preliminary level connection with the tool. Yi Shiwen carefully thought back for a moment and realized that this must have happened when mysterious space protected him when he came under a major attack by the Scarlet Mirror. Then it was certainly related to the mysterious space in his mind, although he was still somewhat confused, but it was certain that as long as he controlled the Scarlet Mirror, this little devil would simply have no strength to fight back. Devil? Don't you confuse this lord with the likes of those inferior creatures. The little devil said with a clear disdain on its face. Then what the hell are you? Yi Shiwen asked, because if it was not a devil then what in the hell was it? In the mind of Yi Shiwen flashed the various documents and records from the time when Devil World invaded Jin Wujie. In those documents, there was a proper description about various species of devils, but he looked at this little devil, he truly couldn't figure out its kind. This lord is a tool spirit, you don't know about tool spirits? The little devil said, then looked towards Yi Shiwen. Tool spirit. Yi Shiwen was shocked when he heard this little devil referring to itself as a tool spirit. He certainly knew what a tool spirit was, the so-called spirit of a spiritual tool. It was said the tool spirits live in the spiritual tools and possess spiritual powers as well as intelligence, but the intelligence level of these tool spirits was quite low and could only be compared to the intelligence of a dog, and some of them became good friends with the experts who owned the spiritual tool. However, there were cases when the spiritual tools would give rise to tool spirits who developed wisdom after some chance coincidences, and sometime, they could have the intelligence comparable to the IQ level of a 4 or 5-year-old human kid, and this level of intelligence was considered very good. But, this little devil's IQ level was higher than an average person, which was definitely extremely rare. Although it's an unfathomable mystery, but if the Tianyuan mirror had not suddenly and unexpectedly recognized you as its master, then do you think that a lowly human would still be alive and talking right now? The little devil looked at Yi Shiwen with a look of contempt on its face. It was evident that the little devil simply looked down on humanity. You are currently in my grasp and I know 1,000 ways to torment you. Yi Shiwen sneered and thought that apparently, this little devil tool spirit still didn't understand the situation it was in right now. Now he was the master of Tianyuan mirror and it was merely the tool spirit of the mirror, so if it wanted to pick a fight with him, then he naturally had a lot of ways to deal with this little devil tool spirit. The little devil didn't know about the cruel torture methods Yi Shiwen was talking about, its small body suddenly shivered and a trace of fear appeared on its face. What do you think Tianyuan mirror really is? That's our mighty Devil King's instrument. You do know what a Devil King is. He is the ruler of 10,000 worlds. The little devil said in a loud voice. Don't forget that you're still in my hands. Yi Xuan sneered loudly, and it was clear from the expression on his face that he simply didn't care about Devil King and other stuff related to Devil World. "You lowly human," the little devil suddenly got furious at Yi Zaiwen's attitude and started struggling in his hand. "Shut up, try and annoy me one more time and I will exterminate you." Yi Xuan got sick of hearing it saying lowly human over and over. The existence of a tool spirit largely depended on its master, and when the link between the minds of the master and the tool spirit is strong, then the master could bring out the true abilities and formidable power present in the original spiritual tool, and while cooperating with the tool spirit, the power of the original spiritual tool would also increase a lot, but if the tool spirit showed disloyalty towards its master, then it was better to erase it in order to obtain complete control over the original spiritual tool. If ordinary people managed to get their hands on an original spiritual tool, then they would generally get rid of the tool spirit, and when the tool spirit was gone, they trained their own mind to establish a new connection with the original spirit tool. After hearing Yi Zaiwen's threatening words, the little devil suddenly shut up, while it secretly cursed in its heart. Just what was this unfathomable mystery that it suddenly had to recognize this lowly human as its master? However, Yi Xuan didn't care what this little devil was thinking. He immediately whistled and called his red-crowned crane. As soon as the red-crowned crane heard the whistle, it immediately flew down flapping its huge wings. Yi Xuan didn't stay there for any longer, just leapt on the crane's back and went straight in the direction of Yi Yuan School. This time, it could be said that his harvest was not small, especially when Tianyuan mirror was considered, although he still did not know the specific details about the function of this mirror, but he had plenty of time to slowly figure it out. But, right now, it was time to go back and participate in the Seed Disciple competition, although at present, Bai Majiao rebellion was still going on everywhere, but for Yi Yuan School and other major powers, it was not a big matter. To a major sect like Yi Yuan School, it was just another Bai Majiao rebellion that it had suppressed once before. In fact, to the present, several of the large sects had not yet contributed towards suppressing the rebellion. Right now, Yi Yuan School only mobilized a part of its true strength and nothing much. Only 100 true disciples were participating in suppressing this rebellion on behalf of Yi Yuan School, and this number was only a small part of the total number of true disciples present in Yi Yuan School. Yi Yun School used to deal with these kinds of things in an orderly proceeding, which was the result of the heritage and strength gathered in a millennium large sect. Yi Xuan already made up his mind that he would give his best in the Seed Disciple competition, because after becoming a Seed Disciple, his status would naturally be different than now, even comparable to some of the core disciples. What, you are going to sect to participate in some Seed Disciple competition? Now, you are the owner of the great Tianyuan mirror, how can you waste your time on such a silly thing? Conquer the world, as long as you do as I say, you can become the next mighty Devil King, then the whole world will shiver from your devil powers. It seemed as if this little devil had come to accept its fate and Yi Xuan as its owner, so it began to try and convince Yi Xuan and make him practice the power techniques of Modeo. Shut up. Quarreling all the way, Yi Xuan rode his crane at the fastest possible speed, and after a flight of a whole day and night, he finally came back to Yi Yuan School. The huge expanse of mountain ranges of Yi Yuan School gradually spread in front of his eyes, and floating peaks were also present among these sierras. Within the Yi Yuan School, true disciples lived on these floating mountain peaks, and not just that, only true disciples were allowed to have their own floating peaks. Even if the heritage and wealth of Yi Yuan School was very rich and extraordinary, but building hundreds of such floating peaks was very difficult. These floating peaks were not only equipped with various Shen methods, most importantly, each of these floating peaks were occupied by true disciples, and if there was an invasion, these floating peaks could be converted into terrifying war fortresses. But these were just rumors. Yi Xuan had never seen these floating peaks turning into war fortresses with his eyes. In the present chaotic times, although in the eyes of Yi Yuan School, the rebellion of Bai Majiao was not a big matter, but who knew how many of those Bai Majiao followers and devils were hidden in the shadows to make their move. Therefore, as a precautionary measure, all of these floating peaks had been placed on the perimeter, while other mountain peaks were located in the deeper places, surrounded and protected by these floating peaks. Yi Shiwen smoothly made his way back to the Tongtian Peak, and just after entering the premises of Tongtian Peak, he found Yi Feng and other disciples of the Qianyu faction, who seemed to have been waiting for him all this time. "Little brother, are you all right?" When Yi Feng saw that Yi Shiwen was uninjured, immediately, a smile appeared on his face. Other people also seemed very happy. After all this time, they were saved by Yi Shiwen, although they came back first, but were very worried about his safety. Now when they saw that Yi Shiwen was safe and unharmed, they also felt relieved. "Brother Yi, did Brother Qi slay that giant devil?" At this time, Zhang Yang asked in a curious tone. Everyone was concerned about the outcome of Qi Fifen's battle in addition to Yi Ziwen's safety. "I do not know, but when I was leaving, Brother Qi clearly had the upper hand in the battle. That great devil leader should not be his match." Yi Shiwen said, "When we get a chance, let's go to the big bright peak of Brother Qi and thank him for coming to our rescue." The floating peak where Qi Fifen lived was a well-known and illustrious floating among the floating peaks of other true disciples and was known as the Big Bright Peak. It got its name from the simple fact that it stayed brilliantly illuminated day and night, just like the legendary paradise. Although, for Qi Fifen, rescuing them might be a small matter, but they still wanted to go and express their gratitude to him for saving them, and another reason was that most of them were excited to meet him in person. "Well, you are right, we left ahead of time without thanking him. We must go and express our gratitude," Yi Feng said. "Little brother, the Seed Disciple competition is starting tomorrow, so if you're going to participate, we must go now." Yi Rushue asked because at this time, perhaps it was only her who was so excited about Yi Shiwen participating in the Seed Disciple competition, hoping for him to show off and steal the limelight. Chapter 134, Competition begins. Yi Shiwen quickly caught up with the registration at the last moment, then he spent the night in his own small courtyard and continued to sort the information he had gathered in the mysterious space by spectating the fight between the two masters. Just from looking their battle, one could say that these two masters were truly at the peak of Truth Realm. At present, Yi Shiwen was at the peak of Xiantian 4th stage and he didn't know when he would reach the Truth Realm, but no matter what, it was going to be a very significant goal for him someday. Before the Seed Disciple competition, Yi Shiwen was trying to enhance his own combat efficiency as far as possible. He was crazily burning the spirit stones, and along with this crazy combustion speed of spirit stones, he continued the crazy analysis of various information and insights obtained from the battle of the two peerless masters. Night time passed, but during the night, he ended up burning a total of 5,000 spirit stones, and now, Yi Ziwen's breath seemed more stable and powerful than ordinary masters at peak of Xiantian's 6th stage, while his Zhen Yuan became 10 times deeper and profoundly vigorous than before, and last but not the least, his body became so formidable that even divine weapons would find it difficult to injure his body. Stronger than ever and having an unprecedented great strength, Yi Shiwen was now confident enough that now, he would be able to very easily defeat the masters at the peak of Xiantian's 6th stage, and even if he was to fight against the master of Xiantian's 7th stage, he would be able to contend, beat, or even kill them. No one could become so formidable overnight. It was possible only for Yi Shiwen, because he had mysterious space to help him. However, this time, he had Little Devil, Yi Mo, to support him as well. Yi Mo was the name given to Little Devil by Yi Shiwen. Even if this little devil was so arrogant and haughty, but it still didn't have a name. In fact, it never was given a name by its former master, that is, the mighty Devil King, because Devil King used to actually treat Little Devil like a slave, and never thought to give it a name. So Yi Shiwen gave a name to the little devil, and although Yi Mo did not say anything after hearing its new name, but Yi Shiwen knew from the look in its eyes that it liked its new name, and even if this tool spirit had a foul mouth, but it didn't have a bad natural disposition. Yi Shiwen also dropped the idea of eliminating Little Devil and to recondense a tool spirit. Yi Mo started to help Yi Shiwen after it received a new name from him, and it was apparently more active than before. It even stopped clamoring all day about lowly humans and so on. Yi Mo was small, cute and extremely lovable, but it was truly a very experienced monster from ancient times. It knew about various Modeo-based power techniques, but according to Yi Mo, they were all at the level of Mighty Devil King, the ruler of 10,000 worlds. According to Yi Mo, Yi Shiwen should rigidly adhere to practicing martial arts for the time being, and it even had a variety of martial arts on its tongue tips and wrote down the ones that would come in handy. Although it was only a tool spirit but still brought forth many brand new concepts about martial arts in front of Yi Shiwen, letting his horizons to widen, and in just one night, he managed to learn a lot which in turn widened his horizons. This made Yi Shiwen to totally abandon the last bit of the idea to eliminate Yi Mo. The idea simply disappeared from his mind without a trace. Autumn was near, in Yi Yuan school, since there were many Zhen methods continuously operating, so the changing seasons couldn't affect Yi Yuan school, giving a spring-like feeling all year round. Yi Shiwen walked from his room into the courtyard and looked toward the distant full moon peak from where the intermittent sounds of ringing bell could be heard. This time seed disciple competition was being held at the full moon peak. Generally speaking, the peak from where the last champion appeared was made the venue for next time seed disciple competition, and for over 10 years, the venue for seed disciple completion hadn't changed. This obviously displayed the strength of Full Moon Peak, the strongest of the top 10 peaks in Yi Yuan school. The Tongtian Peak once became the venue and held seed disciple competition, but it happened almost 30 years ago. In other words, for many years, Tongtian Peak had not managed to produce a champion in the seed disciple competition. A disciple from Tongtian Peak managed to step into the top 10 rankings, but that was also several years ago. Moreover, when that disciple was promoted to the ranks of core disciples, no one after him entered into the top 10 rankings. However, the heritage of Tongtian Peak still couldn't be underestimated, because every time, it would give several disciples who managed to enter the top 100 seed disciple rankings. With the bell, many inner and outer disciples rushed to the full moon peak, although for them, basically there was no possibility to participate in the seed disciple competition, but after all, this was going to be a competition among the top players from among them, and there weren't going to be a lot of opportunities to see this kind of fierce competition among geniuses. One could say that it was a rare opportunity and they planned to watch the competition all the way. In this case, the disciples of Qianyu faction, along with Yi Shiwen, also went to the full moon peak and Yi Feng and other familiar disciples joined as well. Although this had nothing to do with them, but Yi Shiwen was participating in the seed disciple competition, so they naturally came to cheer for him. The so-called Qianyu faction was still new and many new disciples joined recently. When outsiders spoke of Qianyu faction, then the first thought that would come to their minds was obviously Yi Shiwen, the new disciple who recently rose to fame, especially because it was widely known that Yi Zaiwen's strength was comparable to that of the seed disciples. So it was obvious that new members of Qianyu faction, who hadn't met Yi Shiwen in person, were curious to witness his formidable strength in today's seed disciple competition. I heard that this time in the seed disciple competition, because of the massive comeback of Bai Majiao, sect has prepared very rich rewards. There are many powerful pseudo-spiritual tools, there are some medicinal pills as well. Geez, last year's rewards are nothing compared to the rewards this year. That's natural, this year is a special. I hear that taking advantage of resurfacing of Bai Majiao, the 4 large sects as well as the royal family are going to hold a giant joint conference to discuss how to suppress the rebellion of Bai Majiao, and at the conference, a major competition between the strongest disciples of respective sects would also take place, having separate competition for inner disciples, core disciples, and also true disciples. This time seed disciple competition is aimed at selecting the strongest seed disciples, then these 100 seed disciples will be taken away to participate. No wonder sect is being so generous, and this time, the sect is not only going to discuss the matter about suppression of Bai Majiao, but it must also display its formidable strength to the other large sects, so that no one underestimates us. But unfortunately, unlike seed disciples competition, the core disciple competition takes place only once in 2 years and it won't be taking place this year, otherwise we would definitely see wonderful fights. Perhaps this time, there won't be much change in the name list. After all, the seed disciples obtain a large amount of resources from the sect. It's also hard to say because this time, there is a very strong newcomer participating in the competition. His name is Yi Shiwen and I heard that his strength is quite formidable. I have also heard his name. I heard that he probably defeated Imohan, but Imohan at that time was only at the peak of Xiantian 5th stage, so maybe we are overestimating the strength of Yi Shiwen and he may not be able to compete with genuine seed disciples. I heard that Imohan has already entered into the realm of Xiantian Shao 10 days ago, and by the virtue of terrifying might of man's spear unification, he defeated a seed disciple, although now his rank is only 96. This time seed disciple competition is going to be interesting. Many of the disciples began talking among themselves. Yi Shiwen was standing in the crowd and was listening to their discussions, but there wasn't the slightest fluctuation on his expression. Yi Shiwen, those trivial disciples participating in this seed disciple competition are simply not your match. In Yi Zaiwen's mind came the voice of Yi Mo, and it seemed that its voice was full of disdain for these disciples, as if they were not even worth looking at. Right now, Yi Mo was hidden inside the Tianyuan mirror present on Yi Zaiwen's body. Since Yi Mo had always been the tool spirit of Tianyuan mirror, so hiding inside was really too simple. Along with a crowd of many people, Yi Shiwen and other disciples of Qianyu faction entered the Full Moon Peak competition arena. Although Yi Shiwen was quite famous, but if total number of outer disciples and inner disciples was to be added, then the grand total was more than 100,000 people. So how could they possibly recognize Yi Shiwen in this overwhelming sea of disciples? Yi Shiwen and the others entered the square and found seats in the spectators' seating area, and at this time, they saw the many arenas stood erect above the square, where the battles for seed disciple competition were going to take place. The top of a cliff edge portrayed many names, it was almost dense and there were several named, and when looking from afar, one could see that these were the names of the top 10 figures of the seed disciple competition over the years. However, these names belonged to only those who got into the top 10 ranks. Only after entering into the top ranks, one would be eligible to have his name portrayed on the cliff edge and would always be remembered by people. Seeing that only 10 people would get their names engraved for eternity among so many disciples involved in the event, the disciples of Qianyu faction were all fascinated, and this was an unusual excitement, especially because a disciple of Qianyu faction was going to participate in such a major event of Yi Yuan school for the first time, so they had no other alternative but to be excited. In a distant place, above a high stand, the elders and many true disciples were sitting, but mist was covering the surrounding area and no one could actually see these people. These people came to take a look whether there were good seed disciples among the inner disciples, and once they took a liking to some seed disciples, they would try to win over some members. After almost everyone was in attendance, above the high stand, a tall elder stood up and flew in the air, glanced at all the disciples, then said, "The annual inner sect seed disciple competition will start now. The sect is organizing this competition in the hope that everyone can do their utmost and display their strongest state, and for that, the sect has prepared very rich rewards. So long as you give an outstanding performance, you will surely get rewards from the sect. If you are lucky enough, you will also get an opportunity to join the clans of true elders, now soar like a dragon." The elder's words were short but very straightforward, and the disciples who heard this had a burst of emotions in their hearts. As long as they could give outstanding performance, they could get a lot of practice resources from the sect, which could directly increase their standing in Yi Yuan school, a millennium major sect. This was one type of most fair but also most brutal rule of survival. As long as they had enough strength, the sect would give them special fondness and status, would also spend a lot of resources to cultivate them, and as long as they had enough talent, they could succeed, but it was also an extremely brutal rule. The people who possessed strength could succeed, but those with no strength could only continue to get surmounted by the strong ones. The natural law of survival of the fittest truly and vividly manifested itself here in this competition. First battle of number 130 arena, Yi Shiwen, Fang Su. Finally, the guarding core disciple in the arena read Yi Shiwen's name. Chapter 135, 2 rounds, first battle of number 130 arena, Yi Shiwen, Fang Su. Finally, the guarding core disciple in the arena read Yi Shiwen's name. When Yi Shiwen heard his name call, he went up at once, and many of the disciples who did not recognize Yi Shiwen had their eyes fixated on him. Although, the strength of Yi Shiwen was only comparable to that of the seed disciples, but he was still considered as one of the few strongest individuals among hundreds of thousands of inner and outer disciples. He was counted among 200 to 300 top-notch disciples in the total population of inner disciples and outer disciples. In addition to Yi Shiwen, his opponent, Fang Su, was also considered one of the few top-notch disciples. I never thought that the first battle will be between Yi Shiwen and Fang Su. That Yi Shiwen recently rose to fame, but Fang Su is also a very famous supermaster of Xiantian Shao realm. Yes, I did not expect that the first battle of seed disciple competition will be between two seed level masters. Right, I think that these experts will certainly stagger. Stagger, if they stagger then it will be boring, if only stagger then even depending on the strength. Do you know how many people who participate in the seed disciple competition each year, because it is full of uncertainty? If they have good luck then can rush into the top 100 ranks, such as that Imohan, otherwise why would the disciples who possess the insufficient strength of peak Xiantian 5th stage participate in the competition when they know they would just end up humiliating themselves in front of everyone and would be regarded as laughing stocks by everyone? Above the high stand, in the elders' seating area, many of the elders were looking at Yi Shiwen, and among the many true disciples sitting there, Lin Zhantian was also present and looking at Yi Shiwen. There were pleased looks in the eyes of these experts looking at Yi Shiwen. They didn't expect that a new disciple like him, who joined the main sect only few months ago, without taking too long, would be able to challenge seed disciples. Yi Shiwen also felt a lot of gazes aimed at him and felt his heart secretly beating like a drum. He was anxious that these experts might find out about the existence of Tianyuan mirror and Yi Mo because the Tianyuan mirror was still present on his body. It was said that Yi Yuan school did not have biased views regarding the principles of Modao and Shidao. In fact, there were some disciples in Yi Yuan school who practiced Modao-based power techniques and Shidao-based power techniques, but they were all accepted by the main sect. Also there were many people who possessed Modao and Shidao-based spiritual tools, but Yi Yuan school didn't mind them, because according to the viewpoint of Yi Yuan school, these spiritual tools or power techniques were not good or evil, only the people who practiced them were good or evil. As long as the practitioner didn't use these practices for evil deeds, main sect allowed the use of Modao and Shidao. However, it was still difficult to predict their attitude and reaction towards the existences of Tianyuan mirror and Yi Mo, although Yi Shiwen heard from Yi Mo that Tianyuan mirror was actually a very newbie original tool, but he still couldn't control the mirror and was anxious that it might give rise to a difficult situation. Yi Mo, are you sure there won't be any problem? Yi Shiwen immediately asked Yi Mo because those elders were all experts of the truth realm, and if they really made up their mind to get rid of him, then it could be said that he didn't have the strength to fight back. Rest assured, these ants simply have no way to discover my presence. Yi Mo said in a voice filled with pride. Yi Mo still held a deep contempt for humans, although each time it exposed such signs of despising human, he was corrected and scolded by Yi Shiwen, but this notion was profoundly engraved deep into its bones, and was difficult to change, but its attitude towards Yi Shiwen fortunately became better. But Yi Mo still wanted Yi Shiwen to follow the power techniques of Modao and always tried to convince Yi Shiwen that he must become the next peerless devil king and so on. However, Yi Shiwen had already started to ignore these words, and as far as the matter of becoming the next mighty devil king was concerned, he simply had no interest. Yi Shiwen was on the stage and on the opposite stood a youth man clad in moonlight long robe, and while haughtily looking at Yi Shiwen, he said, "I heard you're that arrogant and rampant Yi Shiwen. Probably because you seem to have defeated Imohan, but at that time, Imohan was only at the peak of Xiantian 5th stage and defeating him means nothing. You are not my match, so it's better for you to admit defeat as soon as possible." He confidently tried to persuade Yi Shiwen to admit defeat but did not expect to see a faint smile appearing on the face of Yi Shiwen. Fang Su suddenly became somewhat angry with an embarrassing look on his face. He angrily said, "What are you smiling at? At your presumptuous attitude, do you actually think you can easily defeat Imohan? Your strength is not more than his strength, and if you run into him this time then he will surely beat you within 10 strokes. Yi Shiwen said because he clearly knew about the extremely formidable and fierce strength of man's spear unification, and even if Fang Su was at the same strength level as Imo Han, it would be difficult for him to resist Imo Han's might of man's spear unification realm. Since Imo Han was now a master of Xiantian Shao realm, and so long as he didn't have a bad luck in competition, he should be able to go very far. Even if they were once enemies, but Yi Shiwen didn't want to see someone belittling the abilities of Imo Han. But this time, you are not going to get a chance to meet him. Yi Shiwen indifferently said. Bastard! Fang Su suddenly became furious, and the self-confident look on his face immediately turned red due to shame and embarrassment caused by the insulting words of Yi Shiwen. Fang Su's palm grasped toward the air and directly grasped an aquamarine long double-edged sword. This long sword was a kind of supreme quality cold jade long sword, and even from afar, one could feel its chilly aura, and collision between cold air and steam was emitting sizzling sounds. In an instant, like an aquamarine-colored lightning, he took one step forward, and in the next step, he was right in front of Yi Shiwen. Although Fang Su was an arrogant and haughty guy, who talked big, but he was really very formidable. The strength of a master of the Xiantian Shao Ream was not joke, and his strength was the real deal. No wonder he was confident enough to participate in the Seed Disciple competition and was also expecting to step into the top 100 Seed Disciple rankings. Schwa! Yi Zaiwen's reaction was very fast. He instantly took out his long blade and instantly shot. His whole stature rushed forward like lightning, and with a loud boom, the two instantly collided, sending mighty shock waves in the air carrying many chunks of frozen water vapor. These frozen chunks were instantly blasted in all directions, and many disciples present in the crowd, surrounding the arena, suddenly had to use Jin Qi around their bodies as shields to protect their own lives. A disciple of Ho Tian realm was hit by the frozen chunks and sustained several fractures. After having interrupted the offensive of his opponent, Yi Shiwen did not stop even for an instant, and the Zhen Yuan continuously started to burst within his body, while his long blade chopped out a terrifying blade light, which then directly swept in the direction of Fang Su like a whirlwind, and swept the clouds of mist and ice chunks on its way towards Fang Su. Fang Su used his cold jade double-edged long sword to block Yi Zaiwen's fierce blade attack, but he was just a master of Xiantian Shao realm, so how could he possibly block an attack which contained some parts of Jin Yuan mixed with Jin Qi? Bang! As soon as Yi Zaiwen's blade attack came in contact with Fang Su's long sword, he was instantly sent flying far out of the arena, and suddenly spurted out blood in the mid-flight. Yi Shiwen had mixed his Xiantian Jin Qi with a trace of Jin Yuan, and due to that, Fang Su was simply unable to fight back. In fact, during the fight, Yi Shiwen was trying to conceal his true strength, because he did not want others to find out that he had already completely transformed Jin Yuan, because there could be a genuinely formidable master hidden among the high-ranked seed disciples, and it would be better not to expose his true strength too early in the competition. However, there was a good thing that he didn't have to hide his enormous strength of 200 dragons, which simply sent Fang Su flying far away out of the arena, while spouting blood, and his body fell heavily on the ground upside down. Yi Shiwen actually won, and that too so easily, but how is this possible? It's unbelievable how Fang Su couldn't even block a single blade attack. How is this possible? Yi Shiwen turned out to be so insanely strong, but that cold jade long sword was a pseudo-spiritual tool. Why was it unable to block Yi Zaiwen's blade attack? It seems that we have underestimated the strength of Yi Shiwen. We only thought that since Yi Shiwen has defeated Imo Han, a master at the peak of Xiantian 5th stage, then he must be weak. In fact, no one expected that he would actually be so formidable. Now that you think about it, that Imo Han guy had comprehended the man's spear unification while fighting Yi Shiwen, but he was still defeated. I must say, Yi Zaiwen's strength is simply unfathomable. It seems that his strength is far more than just comparable to the strength of seed disciples, because even among the seed disciples, perhaps only the ones ranked above average would be able to compete with him. At this time, all of the disciples of Qianyu faction were cheering for Yi Shiwen, without a single exception, and it was expected because he was representing their Qianyu faction, a new faction formed by new disciples, and this was his first battle. When he won the battle against a senior disciple so easily, then this made them very happy. Yi Shiwen came down from the arena and the disciples of Qian Yu faction immediately surrounded him and started congratulating him, although it was merely the first round of competition, but he just now defeated a supermaster of Xiantian Shao realm in such a relaxed way. Just from watching the first fight, one could imagine that Yi Shiwen was going to go too far in the competition. But, those senior disciples were constantly staring at Yi Shiwen and there was clear disbelief in their eyes. This new disciple was really a freak. He joined the main sect less than 6 months ago, and now he could participate in the seed disciple competition, and not just that, he so easily defeated a supermaster of Xiantian Shao realm as if it was child's play for him. Although they had heard that this year's new disciples were very fierce, but just what this ridiculous formidable strength actually was and how could he obtain it so fast? They joined main sect more than a decade ago and still didn't dare to sign up in seed disciple competition. Yi Zaiwen's facial expression was calm like the surface of a still water, and no matter what those people were thinking, he quietly waited for the arrival of the next battle. But Yi Shiwen didn't have to wait for too long, and soon, the first battle in other arena also ended. After a small time given for recuperation, it was time to start the second battle, although it could be said that in this case, it was quite unfair for those who were slower in finishing their battles in comparison to those who finished earlier. In this case, it was Lin Chan, and if his strength was strong enough, then he would have finished his own fight earlier than Yi Shiwen. So if he couldn't defeat his opponent earlier than Yi Shiwen, then it could be considered fair, because if everyone was given long enough time for relaxation, then it was not fair to the strength of the stronger contestant. Soon, Yi Zaiwen's turn arrived in the second round of the competition. This time, his opponent looked like a 25 or 26-year-old guy. When he saw that his opponent actually turned out to be Yi Shiwen, suddenly a forced smile appeared on his face. Although he hadn't seen Yi Zaiwen's first fight, but he already heard from other people about his extraordinary performance. He soon realized that he would not be able to contend with Yi Shiwen. A super master of the Xiantian Shao realm couldn't block one attack from Yi Zaiwen's blade and was sent flying out of the arena, let alone a mere disciple at the peak of Xiantian 5th stage. The thoughts continually wrestled in his mind. Then he cupped one hand into the other across his chest and said, "Brother Yi, I accept my incompetence in front of your strength, I admit defeat." Yi Shiwen wins. Chapter 136, Fight between powerful contenders. Yi Zaiwen's opponent in the second round admitted defeat, giving him an easy victory without the need of even lifting a finger. Yi Shiwen, I did not think that you would be able to enter into the third round, but you will soon die. Enjoy the final moments of your life while you still can. Yi Shiwen just came down from the arena and suddenly heard someone sneering and referring to his name from one side. He turned his head to take a look and actually found that it was the so-called young marquis from before whom he had severely injured few months ago. Yi Shiwen carefully observed the young marquis and noticed that all the injuries inflicted by him few months ago were not only healed, but he had become even more formidable than before. Back then, he had entered half a step into the Xiantian Shao realm, but now he had actually reached the peak of Xiantian's 6th stage. This young marquis' situation was not just as simple as having his cultivation grow to the next level, but he actually crossed the threshold, and this led to his strength undergoing tremendous change. However, the last time Yi Shiwen saw young marquis, he didn't see the slightest signs of him breaking through the threshold of Xiantian 5th stage to reach the Xiantian 6th stage. According to Yi Zaiwen's initial estimate, young marquis would at least need several years in order to break from the threshold of Xiantian 5th stage, perhaps at least 10 years. Although 10 years seemed very long, but one must know that the lifespan of a Xiantian master was around 200 years, so a period of 10 years was not a long time in comparison. Because the ridge between Xiantian 5th stage and Xiantian 6th stage was considered one of the largest, and it was said that more than half of the Xiantian warriors couldn't cross this ridge throughout their lives. If the most talented disciples somehow managed to get favor from the sect and attain a lot of practice resources, then it was possible to break through this threshold and reach the Xiantian 6th stage, otherwise even the period of 10 years was not too long. However, now it seemed like that during these few months, young marquis did not just manage to completely recover from his serious injuries, but he unexpectedly advanced to the peak of Xiantian 6th stage. This speed was simply unimaginable, and even when compared with Yi Shiwen, his growth couldn't be considered slow. The eyes of young Marquis were brimming with a strong killing intention while he was glaring at Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen noticed the poisonous look in his eyes along with a clear hateful expression on his face and thought that none of the people he had previously defeated turned into this sort of vicious character. The impact of losing to Yi Shiwen had taken its toll on the psyche of young Marquis. After joining Yi Yuan school, it was obvious that he no longer was the arrogant young master of his clan, but later, on virtue of his impressive strength and talent, he realized that he could still maintain his previous status and could make those weaker than him to listen to him and serve him. It was only a pity that he mistook Yi Shiwen for a weakling and tried to threaten him, but did not think that soon after coming to the main sect, Yi Shiwen would actually be so insanely strong, that even those senior disciples, along with their profound experiences and dignity, would be trampled under his feet. Yi Shiwen could feel his murderous aura and also made a guess about what he must be planning. Young Marquis was planning to kill him in the arena, although according to the rules of Yi Yuan school, killing a fellow sect disciple invoked severe punishment, but if only wounded, then it was almost equivalent to not getting punished at all, because Yi Yuan school was such a big sect that almost all kinds of injuries could be easily and completely cured. In fact, even severed body parts could be reconnected if the victim was sent to early treatment. So, within Yi Yuan school, disciples used to fight all the time, but very few people would actually kill their opponents. Last time, Yi Shiwen also just severely injured young Marquis but did not kill him because of this consideration. Only two places were exception to this rule, one was the life and death arena while the other one was a public event like this. There were absolutely no rules to put limits on the strengths of the contenders. After all, almost all of the contenders were either seed disciples or comparable to seed disciples, so it was natural that their battles would be very fierce. Just a small distraction might lead to failure, or even serious injuries. If the strength of opponent was far less, then only one could think of going easy, otherwise who would dare to hold back in front of an equally matched opponent? If you are holding such an idea, then I will make you regret it. Yi Shiwen looked coldly at the young Marquis. Ha 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 ha. Young Marquis suddenly started to laugh loudly and wildly, and after a good while, his laugh suddenly transformed into a sinister smile. You have made the biggest mistake of your life by offending someone you must never offend, and look what happened. He gave me strength, and today in the arena, I will kill you. Are you talking about Luo Yifan? Yi Shiwen asked. Humph. That young Marquis snorted loudly and did not answer, but Yi Shiwen obtained the answer he was looking for. So it really was Luo Yifan, incorrigibly wicked. At that time he was in front of witnesses, and since he didn't have evidence against Yi Shiwen, so Luo Yifan couldn't directly kill him, but after going back, he must have felt that it was a mistake not to kill Yi Shiwen while he had the chance, but he couldn't just come and directly kill Yi Shiwen, or he might fall in trouble. Young Marquis did not stay for too long, and walked away, and looking at the back profile of departing young Marquis, Yi Shiwen sneered in his heart, not because of his provocative words. The words of young Marquis simply had no effect on Yi Shiwen, because if his fighting strength had not broken through from the Xiantian 6 heavy, then this time, he really had no chance against Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen, Zhang Qi. Soon, Yi Zaiwen's name was called for the third round, and this time, his opponent was already a seed disciple, but Yi Shiwen was not surprised. After all, he was already in the third round, and from this round onwards, even if his opponent was not a seed disciple, but it would still be a disciple comparable to the seed disciples. For reaching the third round of seed disciple competition, luck was required, but high strength was also an important constraint. As far as Yi Shiwen was concerned, it simply didn't matter who his opponents were to this point. After breaking through the first 3 rounds, he would finally enter into the top 100 ranking of seed disciples. However, Zhang Qi was not just an ordinary seed disciple, his rank was 19th in the ranking list of seed disciples, and possessed an abnormally formidable imposing aura, indicating that he must have entered half-step into the Xiantian 6th stage, and that too not a long time ago, perhaps in the past few months. Zhang Qi looked at Yi Shiwen and said, "Brother Yi, you are very strong, but this time you will surely lose. I must rush into the top 20 rankings." Zhang Kai's face revealed a firm expression. As far as Yi Zaiwen's strength was concerned, it was now needless to say that no one dared to underestimate him, and many people were wondering that perhaps Yi Xuan had already stepped into the Xiantian Shao realm. However, Zhang Qi wanted to step into the top 20 rankings, because this time, the top 20 contenders could obtain a type of medicinal pill called He Dan. After using a He Dan, one could increase their success rate of breaking through from the threshold of Xiantian 5th stage and step into the Xiantian 6th stage by more than 30%. He Dan was a very rare type of medicinal pill because only experts of Truth Realm could refine it, but it increased only a small percentage of success rate of having a breakthrough from Xiantian 5th to Xiantian 6th stage, therefore the masters of Truth Realm rarely refined He Dan, which was the reason why in the past, only the top 3 seed disciples received He Dan as rewards, and after consuming He Dan, these 3 winners would reach the Xiantian 6th stage and become core disciples. But this time, the situation was unique due to the matter concerning Bai Majiao, and sect was going to give enormous rich rewards to the winners. If he could obtain a He Dan, he would at least be able to save himself from several months of self-torturous cultivation. Also, when he would participate in the competition among the 5 major influences, then his increased strength would help him in fetching a good ranking, and at that time, the rewards would be more than now. He would also get favor from the sect, thus helping in his growth in the long run. However, this time seed disciple competition was going to be the first major step. Such being the case, let us both give our best shots. Yi Xuan could see the desire to win in his opponent's eyes, but he would certainly not give up. Brother Yi, get ready. Zhang Qi shouted. Then suddenly, a formidable imposing aura came out of his body and he took out a long blade. He was also a blade master like Yi Xuan, and above his long blade, a white tiger was facing upward and roaring loudly, but its form seemed a bit out of shape. Someone must have carved the creative concept of a fierce white tiger into the blade, indicating that this long blade was definitely a pseudo-spiritual tool. Brother Yi, be careful. Zhang Qi immediately cautioned Yi Xuan, although he was eager to win, but he was definitely not a sinister villain. Zhang Qi clearly knew the unparalleled and tyrannical strength of his white tiger long blade and didn't want to deceive a talented junior like Yi Xuan. Yi Xuan did not speak, but a solemn look appeared on his face, as he had already taken strict precautions. He quickly transformed the Zhen Yuan within his body into Zhen Qi to give rise to a terrifying imposing aura. Zhen Yuan itself was more advanced and purer form of energy than Zhen Qi, and even a little amount of Zhen Yuan could be turned into a large amount of Zhen Qi. Yi Xuan immediately changed Zhen Yuan into Zhen Qi inside his body, sending layers after layers of shock waves in the surroundings, while his imposing aura suddenly rose quickly and wasn't one bit weaker than Zhang Qi. Ha! Zhang Qi shouted loudly and chopped out his long blade, and in a flash, an endless amount of Zhen Qi congealed into blade light and rushed towards Yi Xuan, producing faint howling sounds, and on the midway, the blade light directly transformed into a white tiger. However, at the same time, accompanied by a loud sound of thunder, the hidden dragon rose from the abyss. Yi Zaiwen's palm instantly transformed into a dragon claw, and while using Celestial Step, he instantly rushed in front of the white tiger. His dragon claw rose high and instantly formed a towering giant dragon claw, then immediately descended down directly on top of the white tiger and suppressed it. Boom! Yi Zaiwen's dragon claw grabbed the white tiger and pressed it down on the ground, directly leaving a huge dragon paw print on the arena floor, while the white tiger immediately vanished after being heavily crushed by the huge dragon claw. At that moment, the condensed soul of the white tiger was grasped by Yi Xuan and was instantly destroyed and vanished, accompanied with a sound of kara kara, just like the shattering sound of ice crystals. However, just then, once again, a terrifying Bladiki was instantly chopped out, which then turned into a white tiger and rushed towards Yi Xuan. Yi Xuan also abruptly shot his palm, and immediately, a coiling dragon congealed out of his palm, roared loudly and rushed towards the white tiger. Immediately, the scene turned into a fierce struggle between two evenly matched opponents. On the arena, a white tiger was fighting with a coiling dragon, but Yi Xuan was not anxious that others would see the origin of his move. After all, Yuan School was originally a place to study various kinds of martial arts techniques, and even if they saw, it would account to nothing. Furthermore, he had heard from Lin Zhantian that from the time coiling dragon palm had been taken out of an ancient ruin, no one was able to learn it. In other words, for so many years, Yi Xuan should be the first master to successfully comprehend coiling dragon palm. Most likely, no one would be able to recognize the move when they themselves hadn't seen anyone using it. Moreover, a large sect like Yuan School must have its own several secrets. Yuan School also did not request its disciples to give an honest account of their adventures. If that was the case, then who would dare to show their full strength, and if disciples tried to hide their true strengths, then it would severely affect the overall strength of the sect. Anyways, in a moment, the outcome of the fierce battle between two evenly matched opponents was going to be decided. Chapter 137, New record. At the moment, a coiling dragon was fighting with a white tiger in the arena, and in a flash, a powerful attack of coiling dragon annihilated the white tiger. Unlike the coiling dragon, white tiger didn't possess its own consciousness. However, even if it did possess consciousness, what could it possibly do to defend itself from the vicious and formidable claws of coiling dragon or occasional fierce tail swings? The might of the coiling dragon was enormous, and white tiger simply wasn't its match. Above the high stand, many of the elders were paying attention to Yi Zaiwen's palm technique with curious looks in their eyes. It was obvious that this palm method was an extremely high-grade power technique, though they could not determine its rank, but they were still able to figure out its fundamentals and concluded that it was very formidable power technique. This battle's outcome is already decided. It has been such a pity. Originally, it was quite possible for him to break into the top 20 rankings. Unfortunately, ran into this Yi Xuan. An elder sighed and said, "Luck is a part of the strength, because bad luck partially reflects the manifestation of lacking strength and incompetence." A nearby elder curled his lips and said. These elders and true disciples were looking at the contenders with unusual toxic looks in their eyes. They were the masters of Truth Realm and could easily predict the outcome of the battle between two mere inner disciples without even needing to see the battle all the way to the very end. Above the high stand, a pair of vicious eyes was looking at Yi Xuan. It was none other than Luo Yifan, and right now, several thoughts were constantly raging up inside his heart. In his heart, the idea to kill Yi Xuan didn't diminish the slightest, but he never thought that Yi Xuan would actually be able to attend the Seed Disciple competition. The reason why he did not kill Yi Xuan before because of the presence of a large crowd at the scene, and one more reason was that he was extremely confident on his own skill. He was sure that once Yi Xuan received his sonic wave attack, he would most probably die later, and even if he didn't die, at least he would have to face great consequences from the after effects, and after that, he won't have any advancement in strength. But he never expected that Yi Xuan actually did not die, and there didn't seem any signs of after effects either, which suddenly made him feel deceived. This meant that Yi Xuan wasn't under the impact of his technique and was lying to him. Thinking of this, the anger in his heart was even more difficult to contain, and a killing intention immediately appeared in his eyes, almost anxious to kill Yi Xuan right there. In his heart, he realized that Yi Xuan was certainly related to Luo Tian's death, and the killing intention became even more intense. He pledged to kill Yi Xuan at any cost. Yi Xuan naturally did not know about the commotion going on inside Luo Yifan's heart. It would be a lie to say that Yi Zaiwen's spirit won't be deterred once he knew about Luo Yifan's intentions, but he also knew that Luo Yifan was not someone who would give up so easily. The sense of crisis was present in his heart, but right now, there was no time to think about all that. For now, he needed to concentrate on his current opponent. Zhang Qi must finish this fight. The situation suddenly changed. At that moment, Yi Xuan churned out a wave of vigorous Shen Qi, raised his long blade and chopped out a long thick blade light, which instantly rushed towards Zhang Qi. Zhang Kai's white tigers were successively chopped down and instantly vanished by Yi Zaiwen's blade light. Zhang Qi's face revealed a desperate expression because he did not expect that Yi Zaiwen's real strength would turn out to be so formidable. Shua! Blade light flew across the arena, and since the distance wasn't too long, it instantly arrived in front of Zhang Qi and was about to chop into his body, when abruptly, that blade light seemed to have been manipulated and vanished without a trace. At this moment, Zhang Kai's whole body was covered with cold sweat, but he suddenly discovered that the blade light didn't even touch his body, and right then, Yi Zaiwen's loud voice came from across the arena, "Senior Zhang, you let me win." When Zhang Qi heard this, his face immediately turned red. He was embarrassed. He was simply owned by a junior and made a fool of himself in front of everyone. However, Yi Shiwen was merciful and didn't injure him even the slightest, so he quickly cupped one hand into other across the chest and said, "Thank you, Brother Yi, for showing mercy. This fellow brother is deeply grateful." Not to mention the top 20 ranks, it was fortunate that Yi Shiwen was merciful, otherwise if he had received that blade light attack then he would have faced severe injuries. Today, he could only say that his own luck was bad that he had to face an insanely strong master like Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen jumped down the arena and Yi Mo's voice suddenly resounded in his mind. "Why did you stop? Why didn't you kill him? Anyway, no one would get prosecuted for killing an opponent in the arena. I'm not a devil and I don't kill people for fun," Yi Shiwen lightly said. Yi Shiwen very much appreciated the attitude of Zhang Qi and he was only brutal to his enemies. Human nature is really hard to understand, Yi Mo said. That's why your devil race will never understand human race, Yi Shiwen said while walking. There was always this kind of difference in opinions between him and Yi Mo. He clearly knew that sometimes, Yi Mo's showed a somewhat childish behavior, but its views on some issues were terrifying, and in its eyes, let alone human beings, even those devils were nothing more than lowly ants. For Yi Mo, the war between human race and devil race was just like watching two ant nests fighting for food. Although Yi Mo was not so indifferent to Yi Shiwen, but Yi Shiwen also knew that it was just because they were related to each other as Tianyuan Mirror's owner and tool spirit. Perhaps it had seen so much slaughter over a course of a long time that cruelty had properly immersed deep into its bones, but of course, recently, Yi Shiwen had come to believe that Yi Mo's previous owner was probably a very extraordinary figure, and was really the ruler of 10,000 worlds, and he must have also looked down on people. Just like Yi Mo, Yi Shiwen didn't know how to remove this kind of deep-rooted indifference in its bones, but as long as he didn't have the same viewpoint, he didn't care about Yi Mo's indifference. After winning the third round, Yi Shiwen successfully stepped into the top 100 and justifiably became a seed disciple. This immediately aroused the crowd and also the disciples of Qianyu faction. Earlier Yi Shiwen was only famous as a disciple whose strength is comparable to the strength of seed disciples, but now that he stepped into the top 100 rankings of seed disciples, he officially established his strength in front of the whole crowd, and now he was no longer just comparable to seed disciples, but actually became a seed disciple. This year, Yi Shiwen joined the main sect, and in the first year only, he was able to reach all the way into the top 100 ranks of the seed disciple competition. By becoming a seed disciple, now he was above hundreds of thousands of inner and outer disciples of the main sect. The senior disciples couldn't even remember when was the previous time something like this happened in the main sect. Some of the senior disciples remembered that a few decades ago, a new disciple was able to achieve such a feat in the main sect, and that person was none other than Qi Fifan. However, now, in the Yi Yuan school, Qi Fifan was at the height of power, and being able to enter into the top 100 seed disciple rankings was one of the many records he made in the main sect, and this record was not too splendid as well. Moreover, that was a long time, decades ago, so long that not more than half of the inner or outer disciples from that time still remembered this record in the corners of their minds, and half of them simply did not remember at all. After all, it had been decades since they joined the main sect. A period of decades was not a short time for warriors of Xiantian realm, and as far as Hotian realm warriors were concerned, it was a very long time. At least now in the eyes of all the disciples, Yi Shiwen created a record, a brand new record, and this record would be accompanied and remembered by many disciples of his batch, just like for decades, many disciples from Qi Fifen's batch still remembered his records. This was also the reason why many senior disciples wanted to join the faction created by a true disciple, but for joining the factions led by true disciples, there were strict admission rules and only elite core disciples could obtain a membership in these factions. Inner and outer disciples simply had no chance. Not to forget, only few could manage to become core disciples. So even if they were very much envious, but there was no other way. However now, the appearance of Qianyu faction gave them an additional choice. So long as Yi Ziwen's outstanding growth continued and his progress didn't depreciate in the future, then there was a huge probability that he would become a true disciple. This was a gamble and could return huge profits in the future. Chapter 138. Once again defeats Emohan. This was a gamble on the assumption that Yi Shiwen would continue to progress in the future and would finally reach the truth realm, then they would be able to reap great benefits, so there were many senior disciples who acted out of their own accord and suddenly showed interest in joining the Qianyu faction, and there were many more, who were waiting and watching from the sidelines. Regarding this, Yi Feng, Yan Qiliang and other high-level members of Qianyu faction naturally knew that it was naturally due to the successive victories of Yi Shiwen and his incredible strength, openly displayed in front of everyone. The sudden popularity of Qianyu faction was all because of Yi Ziwen's popularity, which was acting as a magnetic force to attract new members, and due to that, the total number of members in the faction suddenly increased a lot. Originally, the senior disciples had not shown interest in joining the Qianyu faction, but now, they had come to join in abundance, and among them, there were many masters of Xiantian 5th stage. They were counted among the elite inner disciples and originally didn't spare a glance to the Qianyu faction, but now, they had also started to show interest. And this was all due to Yi Ziwen's enormous influence, because in this world, everyone worshipped the strong and only strong people commanded respect. Formidable individuals could bring great influence, more than anyone could imagine. In the eyes of the crowd, there was anticipation as they were curiously waiting to know who Yi Ziwen's opponent would be in the 5th round, and after a while, his next opponent turned out to be Emohan. With a long spear standing erect next to him, there was a cold and gloomy look in Emohan's eyes, while his imposing aura was much more formidable than it was last time. During the time of Yi Ziwen's first battle in the Seed Disciple competition, almost no one was optimistic about his victory, and thought that he was being overconfident, but right now, no one thought that Yi Shiwen was being overconfident. In fact, this time, they were quite themselves that he would certainly win. Although a lot of people's views were lopsided, thinking that Yi Shiwen would win, after all, even if the strength of Emohan was quite high, but he was only at the peak of Xiantian 5th stage, although he had comprehended Manspear Unification Realm, but Yi Shiwen defeated him once before, and right now, Yi Shiwen now should obviously be more powerful than before, so the outcome seemed to be obvious to everyone. I did not expect to meet you in the 5th round, Yi Shiwen said. I've been waiting for this for a long time, Emohan said in a cold but determined voice, and at this time, his eyes were focused on Yi Shiwen, without caring about the cheering for Yi Shiwen still going on in the surroundings. These cheers were not causing any effect on him, because there was only thing that was continuously revolving in his mind: defeat him, defeat him. This was the only thought remaining in his heart: defeat Yi Shiwen. You have become more powerful than before, but I still want to defeat you, Emohan said, and in his voice, there was not a single trace of weakness, although he could see that Yi Shiwen had become more formidable, but he himself was not the same as before, and compared to 3 months ago, he had also become more powerful, so much powerful that he was able to rush all the way to the 5th round. Let's begin, Yi Shiwen directly said. Emohan shouted loudly. Zhenqi instantly burst up under his feet, and his physique shot forward like an arrow and rushed towards Yi Shiwen, while the spear in his hands suddenly shot. Compared to the last time, he was a lot faster this time, and the ice-cold chill in the air made the surrounding temperature to reduce quickly, and to such an extent that it could easily freeze up people. When Yishuan saw the spurky wrapped on the spear as it arrived in front him, his eyes flashed with a color of surprise in them. Yishuan did not expect that Emohan would be able to so quickly wrap spurky on the spear. He truly lived up to his reputation as a genius and his strength seemed a lot higher than before. One could say that if he had not met Yishuan, then it was possible that he might have stepped into the top 20 rankings. Yishuan grasped towards the void and a long blade made up of Zhenqi suddenly condensed in his hand and fiercely chopped out. Boom! A loud sound of spear intersecting the blade spread everywhere, causing an intense air friction, and instantly, a burst of thunderclap-like sound echoed in the arena. Why do you not use your blade? Do you look down on me? Emohan asked in a cold voice. Emohan was just like a mad martial artist who could allow himself to fail, could allow himself to die, but definitely could not allow anyone to look down on him. You are mistaken, I don't need a blade to use my blade skills because my blade technique is actually a method that requires congealing Zhenqi into a blade, so there's not much difference whether I use a blade or not. Yishuan lightly said. Cold Moon Beheader itself required Bladiki as the main attacking method, and unless Yishuan was facing an evenly matched opponent, using a blade didn't make much difference. If the strength of Yi Zaiwen's opponent was less, then using a blade did not make a difference, but if his opponent was much stronger, then also using a blade couldn't change the outcome. If that's the case, then I was impolite. Emohan did not think that there really were some masters who could simply use hands to display weapon-based power techniques. As his voice fell, he instantly shot his spear. The spear point glittered with a cold and threatening light, and just like a snake had come out of the hole, the spear's shadow went toward Yishuan and instantly arrived in front of him. Yishuan also instantly released Zhenqi from his body and congealed a long blade, then released several dancing blade shadows, which moved towards the spear shadow. Clang! The loud sound of metals clashing spread in the arena along with sparks from the collision between the two. Yi Zaiwen's long blade covered with Zhenqi and the spear of Emohan heavily clashed and produced rippled of shock waves that spread out of the arena, and soon, the two figures severely collided into each other. Yishuan stood motionless, but Emohan hastily went back few steps and looked at Yishuan with a startled look in his eyes. Emohan did not hesitate and once again activated the Man-Spear unification, and although he just exchanged 2 moves with Yishuan, he was compelled to use the strength of Man-Spear unification realm, and right now, during his second fight with Yishuan, he discovered that in these 3 months, he himself had become much more tyrannical, but Yi Zaiwen's tyranny was even more unreasonable. One could say that last time, they were almost evenly matched, but this time, he had no option but to use the strength of Man-Spear unification to resist against the formidable strength of Yishuan. Emohan heavily trod on the ground and his physique started to merge with his spear and started taking form of a spear shadow, and above the spear point, Xiantian Zhenqi rapidly condensed, and by means of his own aura, his body seemed to have stacked with the spear, and totally enveloped in Zhenqi, his body almost fused together with the spear. He entered into the Man-Spear unification realm and pierced through the air producing chi-chi sound. It seemed as if the air was being stabbed and cracking under the tremendous strength of Emohan's spear attack. Facing the Man-Spear unification of Emohan, a dignified expression appeared on Yishuan's face. He now understood how Emohan was able to rush all the way to this round, because by using the strength of Man-Spear unification, Emohan's combat strength surpassed the strength of masters at the peak of Xiantian 5th stage, and was comparable to masters of Xiantian's 6th stage. However, unlike last time, Yishuan would not dodge this time. His stature blasted forward and went straight towards Emohan's Man-Spear unification form. On the arena, a spear light was advancing towards a blade light, and only after an instant, under the gazes of numerous spectators, a storm swept out, and in a blink of an eye, the two opponents finally arrived in front of each other. Boom! 2 figures severely clashed into each other and a surge of terrifying blast from the tip of the 2 weapons fiercely spread and swept off like a tsunami, sending shock waves in all directions. In the wake of this terrifying blast, a figure was sent flying out of the arena upside down. The rioting air and shock waves calmed down after a moment, and the situation on the arena became apparent to everyone when they saw Yi Xuan standing on the stage, crossing his hands behind the back. Now, the outcome of this battle was no longer hidden from the spectators. Suddenly, countless onlookers in the surroundings cheered, and at this time, there was no longer any distinction, whether it was new disciples or the senior disciples, all of them were cheering and shouting, and not just for a new disciple like Yi Xuan, they were cheering for a formidable genius who just now created a brand new record, right in front of their eyes. Wasn't this situation simply against the heavens' will? Many of the senior disciples who originally disliked Yi Xuan had to admit that Yi Xuan was just too formidable. He defeated Immortal, who was not just strong. After entering into the Man-Spear unification realm, his strength increased to the point of being comparable to the masters of Xiantian's 6th stage. Now, it was obvious to everyone that if he had not faced Yi Xuan in this round, then he might have entered into the top 10 seed disciple rankings with ease. However, unfortunately, he encountered Yi Xuan, and it was just like fate. Whether it was Zhang Qi or Immortal, both of them were strong and could have achieved higher ranks in this competition, but Yi Xuan was just too strong, and to this point in the competition, no one was able to become a hurdle in his advancement. Yi Xuan wins. Yi Xuan smoothly crossed the 5th round and had already broken the old record of Qi Fifan and created a brand new record in the recent history of Yi Yuan School. At least one should be able to count him as the first person to create this record in the past 100 years of Yi Yuan School. While, at this time, everyone was boiling with excitement and ebullition, Yi Xuan heard a cold voice directed at him. Yi Xuan, your luck ends here, enjoy your final moments while you can. Yi Xuan looked and saw that it was that young marquis, and right now, was looking at Yi Xuan with his eyes filled with hatred. There was a color of envy flashing in his eyes. Why, he himself managed to rush into the 6th round, then why was no one concerned about him? Why were everyone's eyes fixated on Yi Xuan? Why couldn't he get the attention of everyone? Why him? Yi Xuan looked coldly at the young marquis, because he just knew that his next opponent would be none other than this arrogant and despotic young marquis. He did not know whether it was a coincidence or someone's trick, but in a short time, at this place, he once again bumped into the young marquis. After resting for a moment, Yi Xuan heard his name being called for the next round. The next battle, Yi Xuan, Zhu Bingsun. Zhu Bingsun was the name of the young marquis. Come on Yi Xuan, defeat that Zhu Bingsun. Come on, make history, create a legend. Almost all of the disciples were cheering in support of Yi Xuan and really wanted him to win. If Zhu Bingsun won, then it won't be worth looking at, because almost every year in the past, the same thing had happened over and over in the seed disciple competition. Everyone was craving for a miracle, a heart-pumping legend to take birth in front of their eyes, a miracle that they would never forget. And if Yi Xuan actually won, then that would be entirely different, because it would create a historical record, a record that had never been created ever in the history of Yi Yuan School. It would be like witnessing the birth of a miracle, a legend, and after winning this round, his next opponent would be an elite seed disciple and also one of the strongest experts. If Yi Xuan won against such an opponent in the next round, then he would be able to create history, create myth in Yi Yuan School. Everyone was supporting Yi Xuan and wanted him to win, rather than a stereotyped warrior like Zhu Bingsun. Due to this, Zhu Bingsun's complexion suddenly changed and became unsightly. He was extremely furious and was looking at Yi Xuan with killing intent overflowing from his eyes. Chapter 139, Martial Arts Abolished. Yi Xuan, today is the day you die. A cruel smile appeared on Zhu Bingsun's face. He hated Yi Xuan and finally got the opportunity to take revenge. Zhu Bingsun's terrifying and extraordinary aura instantly released on the arena, and Zhen Yuan overflowed everywhere, revealing the fact that he was already at the peak of Xiantian's 6th stage. Finally, at this time, the complexions on the faces of all of the disciples and elders suddenly changed. Perhaps the strength of a master at the peak of Xiantian's 6th stage couldn't be regarded as anything, but this was the semi-final round of seed disciple competition, and displaying such strength on the arena was definitely a huge variable. What, How is this possible? An elder said in an astonished manner while his widened eyes were staring towards the arena. It was obvious the impact of Zhu Bingsun's strength was significant on not just disciples but elders as well. Above the high stand, a cruel look flashed in Luo Yifun's eyes, while he was looking at Yi Shiwen. I never thought that this Zhu Bingsun would actually have such strength. Well, if this is the case, then I am afraid that this time, Yi Shiwen is in a very dangerous situation. I heard that there is a feud going on between Zhu Bingsun and Yi Shiwen. Perhaps this time, Yi Shiwen is going to suffer a cruel fate at the hands of Zhu Bingsun, because it doesn't seem like he will go easy on Yi Shiwen. If I was him, then I will not set foot on the arena, because if I set foot on the arena, then looking at Zhu Bingsun's attitude, it would be no different than fighting in the life and death arena. That's why you can never reach the same height as Yi Shiwen. If he concedes in this fight, then from now on, his heart of martial arts will completely break, and after that, it will be difficult for him to advance even an inch forward, and especially for a genius, it will be no different than living death, so he might as well die now. I did not think that you have the courage to come up, but now that you have come up, you won't get an opportunity to go down. Zhu Bingsun sneered again and again. For him, it didn't matter whether Yi Shiwen came up or not, he was willing to accept both. If Yi Shiwen would come up, then he would seize the opportunity to kill him, and if perhaps Yi Shiwen didn't come up, then it would show that he was afraid, that he was actually a timid man who was afraid of getting into trouble, and it would permanently leave a stain on his reputation. Then Yi Shiwen won't be able to live bravely and fearlessly, and by that time, it won't even be necessary to kill Yi Shiwen. Your rubbish talks are really annoying. Yi Shiwen indifferently said. If you are so eager to commit suicide, I'll gladly help you out. A sinister look appeared on Zhu Bingsun's face as he said. Zhu Bingsun grasped towards the void and suddenly grabbed a red-colored double-edged sword, very exquisite, but at this time, instantly, the whole arena as if turned into a volcano and heat waves started to blow in all directions. This was actually a spiritual tool, not a fake spiritual tool like pseudo-spiritual tool or something, but a real and authentic spiritual tool, driven by Zhen Yuan. When Zhu Bingsun took out this real spiritual tool, suddenly, it seemed as if the whole atmosphere started to boil. It was obvious that a pseudo-spiritual tool couldn't be a match for this spiritual tool. Spiritual tool, coupled with the inherent strength of peak Xiantian's 6th stage, who could be Zhu Bingsun's opponent in the seed disciple competition. Suddenly, all of the disciples in the crowd, who were cheering for Yi Shiwen a while ago, were immediately surrounded by despair and started worrying for Yi Shiwen. Looking at the current situation, it seemed absolutely impossible for Yi Shiwen to win against Zhu Bingsun. Even among the core disciples, not everyone could have spiritual tools. Only a small part of core disciples possessed spiritual tools, and even if it was only a low-grade spiritual tool, its might was completely a huge mess and hard to deal with. Yi Shiwen, today you will die, I must give you an ugly death. Zhu Bingsun said in a cold voice. If you think you will be able to beat me relying on this, then you are too naive. Yi Shiwen said in a calm voice. This is the final struggle. Zhu Bingsun shouted, his red sword danced, and in an instant, red flame roared and surrounded the red sword, and it seemed as if the entire air was burning, issuing zizi burning sound, and it instantly went towards Yi Shiwen. The roaring flame condensed into a flaming red dragon, and it seemed its claws were tearing the world itself, while it nipped towards Yi Shiwen, as if it was going to swallow Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen sneered, looked coldly at Zhu Bingsun, and in a flash, terrifying peerless waves of Zhen Yuan wantonly rippled out of his body. Yi Ziwen's hand extended with ease, Zhen Yuan condensed on it and it directly turned into a claw, and immediately rushed towards Zhu Bingsun's flaming red dragon. The next instant, Yi Ziwen's big claw directly grabbed the flaming red dragon and fiercely crushed it. What is this? It is impossible. On the high stand, Luo Yifan suddenly stood up from his seat and looked incredibly at Yi Shiwen. He just couldn't believe his eyes when he actually saw Yi Shiwen using Zhen Yuan. How could Yi Shiwen refine Zhen Yuan? He had gathered information about Yi Shiwen and knew that he had not yet entered into the Xiantian 6th stage, so how could he refine Jin Yuan? Also, if he was really not at Xiantian 6th stage, then it was even more bizarre that he had been able to refine Jin Yuan. At this point, everyone realized this simple fact: if Yi Shiwen could use Jin Yuan, then there was no difference left between him and a master of Xiantian 6th stage. It was really an unwise step not to kill Yi Shiwen while he had the chance. The killing intention suddenly increased inside Luo Yifen's heart as he was witnessing the scene of Yi Shiwen using Jin Yuan with a mad look in his eyes. How is this possible? At this time, Lin Jintian also suddenly jumped up from his seat and looked at Yi Shiwen with disbelief, then said, "How is this possible? He obviously stepped into the Xiantian realm not long ago, then how can he refine Jin Yuan so quickly?" Many elders and true disciples sitting on the high stand had bewildered looks on their faces. Originally, when they found out that Zhu Bingsun was at the peak of Xiantian's 6th stage, then that had made them quite surprised, but after all, Zhu Bingsun had been a master at the peak of Xiantian 5th stage for some time, so if he managed to break into the Xiantian 6th stage, then although it was surprising, but it was not bewildering. However, when they saw Yi Shiwen using Jin Yuan, and his strength also seemed comparable to the masters of Xiantian's 6th stage, and this immediately made them unable to sit still. One must know, there was a heaven and earth difference between Xiantian's 6th stage and Xiantian 5th stage, and Yi Shiwen managed to refine Jin Yuan without even reaching the Xiantian 6th stage, but he definitely possessed the combat strength of Xiantian's 6th stage realm. There were shocked looks on the faces of many people because perhaps this scene had totally disturbed their logic. One must know that Yi Shiwen already possessed the strength equivalent to the master of the Xiantian 6th stage without even stepping into the Xiantian 6th stage, such a peerless genius. He clearly surpassed the previous peerless genius, Qi Fifan. Although Qi Fifan was very powerful, but even he had been unable to show such an extent of progress and strength in his era. Also, Yi Shiwen had yet to break through to the Xiantian 6th stage. In that case, since he had not stepped into the Xiantian sextet and still managed to see through the mysteries of Jin Yuan and refined as well, such a person was absolutely a rare talent. How is this even possible? Yi Shiwen has been able to refine Jin Yuan, and that too at such a profound level. It is really terrifying. This is just great. Now we can see a fierce competition between the two evenly matched sides. All of disciples were shocked, but then suddenly detonated the scene with their loud cheers. All of a sudden, numerous pairs of eyes were firmly fixated on the two men, and were probably waiting for the fierce battle to start. Although it was a seed-disciple competition, but this fight was clearly going to be at the level of fights between two core disciples. This fight would be no different than the fights between front-row seed disciples who were on the verge of becoming core disciples. These disciples who were almost on the verge of becoming core disciples had just entered into the Xiantian 6th stage, although they had not completely transformed Xiantian Jin Qi into Jin Yuan because of the difficulty of conversion, and it took a long time. For some people, it took a few days, for some, it took several months, and sometimes, it could also need a full year to attain complete conversion. Sometime, even longer than that. Moreover, the strength of these people was obviously inferior to the two contenders present on the arena because Yi Shiwen had already completely transformed Jin Yuan and Zhu Bingxing was at the peak of Xiantian's 6th stage. At this time, above the arena, Yi Zaiwen's whole body was covered with Jin Yuan and fluttering his clothes, and suddenly, from his body, a formidable and peerless aura scattered in all directions, just like layer upon layer waves were rushing in the ocean. Zhu Bingsun, you think you can elevate your skills by relying on someone else, and you will still be my opponent? Trash will forever be trash, and today, I'll educate you and allow you to see the huge gap between us, so that you never bear the thought of challenging me ever again. Yi Shiwen said in a cold voice. Yi Shiwen, just because you managed to refine Jin Yuan, don't be so confident, because even if you step into the Xiantian 6th stage, you will still not be my opponent. Today, I will crush you once and forever. Zhu Bingsun roared, his eyes were filled with jealousy. Why, just why, in order to gain strength, he had to pay a huge price, but this Yi Shiwen, why did he possess such insane strength even though he recently joined the main sect? Yi Shiwen, die! Zhu Bingsun roared, and along with his red sword, he turned into a streamer and instantly rushed towards Yi Shiwen. His entire body was flaming with rampaging fire, and from top to bottom, his body looked like the flames itself. Yi Shiwen took out his long blade, but he wasn't holding the blade in his hand because while using the might of Lingqi, he didn't need to hold the blade in his hand. A radiant blade light chopped out in the air at a stunning speed. Two flashes of light severely clashed in the middle of the arena, causing an endless blast which instantly boiled the atmosphere inside the arena, surging out around the perimeter of the set protection enchantment, and at this time, it also began to fracture. Since this protection enchantment was designed only to sustain the battles of Seed Disciple level, but the current battle had reached the fighting level of Core Disciples. Boom! The whole enchantment suddenly disrupted and the blast wave swept toward countless disciples who had to instantly use Jin Qi to resist. All of the disciples exclaimed at the extremely terrifying might of this attack. Poof! Zhu Bingsun spouted blood and his whole body flew upside down. After all, he had recently reached the peak of Xiantian's 6th stage and hadn't used the genuine method to achieve that, so compared with a genuine master of peak of Xiantian's 6th stage, his own strength was quite lacking, not to mention, even if he was a genuine master of peak Xiantian's 6th stage, he would still not be a match of Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen used Celestial Step and his figure instantly overtook Zhu Bingsun's inverted flying figure, then put out his hand to firmly grasp Zhu Bingsun's neck, just like an iron hoop, binding around his nape. Yi Shiwen, I will kill you, this enmity is absolutely irreconcilable. Zhu Bingsun yelled, but at this instant, Yi Ziwen's hand clutched even more tightly, and Zhu Bingsun was unable to breathe or talk. Overreaching yourself, just depending on your own strength, you tried to kill me not just once, but again and again, this is your retribution. Yi Shiwen said in a loud voice, accumulated Jin Yuan in his other hand, and in a flash, it went towards the dantian of Zhu Bingsun and instantly blasted. Bang! Zhu Bingsun's dantian was immediately destroyed, and with this, Yi Shiwen abolished his martial arts. Dash! Chapter 140, Mutual Confrontation. I never thought that Zhu Bingsun would actually lose. It's almost like a miracle, who would have thought that Zhu Bingsun would actually be defeated even after being at the peak of Xiantian's 6th stage and he also possessed a spiritual tool. Indeed, although Zhu Bingsun has already entered into the realm of peak Xiantian's 6th stage, but that Yi Shiwen cannot be taken lightly since he has already refined Jin Yuan. Yes, before the battle actually started, no one thought that he actually possessed such incredible strength. It's a pity, if these two hadn't bumped into each other in the semi-final round then they could undoubtedly obtain the places of champion and runner-up in the final round. But didn't you just listen to what Yi Shiwen said a moment ago, that Zhu Bingsun is actually working for someone, and that person must have used some means to enhance his strength. So that's how it is, no wonder, actually I know that Zhu Bingsun, very arrogant but his strength was ordinary, but all of a sudden, he became so formidable, which makes me want to think, just whose is behind him. You don't know. I heard that Zhu Bingsun has joined the Fanshen Palace, the faction of Brother Luo, a true disciple. 5 years ago, Brother Luo entered into the ranks of true disciples, and Zhu Bingsun has only recently joined his faction. So, then, the one behind Zhu Bingsun is actually Brother Luo. Hush, hush, Brother Luo is on the high stand, if he heard then you will surely die, don't you want to live? A disciple cautiously said. Even if Brother Luo is a true disciple, he cannot do such a thing because it will simply break the rules of sect. If every true disciple try to casually enhance the strength of the members of their faction to win the championship, then these true disciples would end up controlling the outcomes of these battles. Furthermore, the competition would lose its meaning and there would be no point for us to come and watch. Generally speaking, so long as stepped into the Xiantian's 6th stage, disciples would generally choose to become core disciples, because, compared to the core disciples, the treatment of inner disciples was very different, and this was also in order to keep the strength of strong inner disciples in check and encourage them to strive and become core disciples. By staying in the ranks of inner disciples, he seized the opportunities of other inner disciples. But, disciples were not forced to choose between inner or core ranks. The decision to choose was solely up to them, so if Zhu Bingsun wanted to participate in the seed disciple competition, despite being a master at the peak of Xiantian's 6th stage, it could not be regarded as breaking the rules. In fact, in the past, many disciples of Xiantian's 6th stage had appeared in the seed disciple competition. If he had achieved his current strength relying on his own practice, then no one would say anything, but a moment ago, Yi Xuan mentioned that his strength was not due to his own practice, but he had cheated and undergone forced enhancement of his strength, and was sent to participate, which was tantamount to committing a huge taboo and clearly violated the rules. Since the treatment obtained by the disciples of inner rank and core rank was different, the resources given to the inner disciples were always inferior in comparison to the resources given to the core disciples by the sect. If core disciples also participated in this competition and strived for championship, then there would be no hope left for the inner disciples, therefore this matter was something that really incurred public wrath. These discussions were going on in whispers only, but as more and more people entered the discussion, gradually, these whispers turned into noise. Above the high stand, Luo Yifun's complexion was somewhat unsightly, and loudly snorted. Of course, the discussions of these inner and outer disciples were naturally not causing any impact on him, because for a true disciple like him, he didn't need to give explanation to them. The reason of his vexation was that he miscalculated once again and allowed Yi Xuan to escape, which made him very angry, extremely angry. This made him feel like his self-esteem had been provoked. Yi Xuan must die at all costs. In the heart of Luo Yifun, the intention to kill was boiling. Yi Xuan not only defeated Zhu Bingsun, who had been trying to be insufferably arrogant a moment ago, but completely abolished his martial arts, and without even thinking twice, in front of such a large crowd, he reached out his hand and directly crippled Zhu Bingsun. None of the elders came to stop him, because right after standing on this arena, even life and death remained only in the hands of the contenders and no one was allowed interfere or question their actions. Yi Xuan had frightened a large number of inner disciples and outer disciples. He was unexpectedly so fierce, although when Yi Xuan was winning all the initial rounds in a relaxed manner, everyone guessed that he must be saving his real strength, his true strength, and should be very formidable, but they never thought that his true strength would actually be so tyrannical. He was easily and readily using Zhen Yuan and his strength also turned out to be many times more compared to that arrogant Zhu Bingsun. Yi Xuan was just a new disciple, so how could he be so formidable? The common sense simply did not conform to his existence, especially for those senior disciples. It was like that kind of impulse to punch the wall. They had spent so many years in the main sect, while Yi Xuan had not even spent 1 year in the main sect. These disciples had been practicing for so many years in the main sect, but the difference in their strengths and Yi Zaiwen's strength was just like the difference between heaven and earth. In their hearts, Yi Xuan had suddenly turned into an enigmatic figure. Compared to the other disciples, who were totally stunned after witnessing Yi Zaiwen's true strength, the disciples of Qianyu faction were celebrating. After all, the stronger Yi Xuan was, the more secured they would be, then no one would try to bully them. And no one knew when but Yi Zaiwen's image already surpassed Yi Feng, Yan Qiliang, and several other high-level members of Qianyu faction, although they were still the senior executives of Qianyu faction, while Yi Xuan almost never took part in any of its affairs, but one must not forget that this was a world where strength was the supreme law, and only an exceptionally strong person could obtain the respect of everyone. Yi Feng and other high-level executives were indeed also competent, and looking at their strengths and talents, they could become outstanding existences among the new disciples, and even within a decade, there was a large possibility that they would break through to the level of core disciples, and in the future, they would most likely become formidable masters. However, they still weren't a match for the current Yi Xuan, who defeated all his enemies one by one in front of them, which was quite shocking for them to accept. Before, Yi Xuan had saved them and overcame one difficulty after another, and now, he defeated these masters as if he was chopping vegetables. By now, In their hearts, an invincible image of Yi Shiwen had already established itself, along with the faith that there wasn't an enemy that Yi Shiwen couldn't defeat. This was faith in his invincibility, and every faction needed at least one person of this type, in order to lead the faction on the path of better development, but the situation in Qianyu faction was rather special, because Yi Shiwen didn't take interest in the affairs of faction. Regardless of what those people were discussing among themselves, Yi Shiwen slowly arrived in front of Zhu Bingsun and said in a cold voice, "Zhu Bingsun, I told you before, if you think you can rely on external means to enhance your strength then you will regret it. Fortunately this is not life and death arena, otherwise you would be a pile of rotten meat by now." Yi Shiwen didn't have a favorable impression of Zhu Bingsun and Luo Yifan. Birds of a feather flock together, both of them were the same type of arrogant people who wanted to kill others when they thought that their own dignity had been damaged. Although Zhu Bingsun's martial arts was spent, but he still didn't faint, and at this time, there was an abnormal pernicious look in his eyes. If his eyes had magical powers, then with just a look, he could have stabbed Yi Ziwen's body and perforated it with countless holes. He hated Yi Shiwen, his pride was his life. But Yi Shiwen had already defeated him twice, and now, he simply wanted to commit suicide. If he could sell his soul to the devil to kill Yi Shiwen, he would not hesitate to sell himself to the devil. However, right now, there was no strength left in his body, his dantian was shattered to pieces by Yi Shiwen, and he didn't have any control over the Zhen Yuan in his body. The Zhen Yuan was running wildly in his meridians like a wild horse, totally out of control, while destroying his meridians and rushing through all his acupuncture points, and so on. But still, he was not aware of the simple fact that if he hadn't provoked Yi Shiwen again and again, then he would not have encountered such a thing, and in his heart, the only thing that remained was pure hatred for Yi Shiwen. If only Yi Shiwen was not there, then he would not be in such a pain. Yi Shiwen looked at Zhu Bingsun lying on the ground, but didn't kill him at the scene, considering that they were already in front of a large crowd, and it was inappropriate, although Zhu Bingsun threatened to kill him again and again, and many other disciples had also heard it, so even if the executives of Yi Yuan School would inquire, he would openly answer. "Yi Shiwen, this is just a battle on arena, but you are too ruthless. By crippling my subordinate, you dared to offend a true disciple." At this time, a faint voice came from the high stand, and it belonged to Luo Yifan. Yi Shiwen sneered and finally could not bear, and various schemes flashed in his mind instantly. The opposite party was a true disciple, and he had stepped into the truth realm only this decade, but definitely deserved to be respected like other warriors of truth realm. Yi Shiwen was determined to have a hands-on argument with him, but he must have a foolproof plan, because at this point, even one misstep might cause a big trouble. With a cold smile on his face, Yi Shiwen said, "Brother Luo's words are totally biased. Looking at this Zhu Bingsun's strength, it is obvious to everyone that he was cheating. God knows who that dog is that helped him in cheating and actually gave him cheat to enhance his strength and snatched ranks from fellow inner disciples. My strength is small and weak and I couldn't dare to have the slightest relaxation, so I did it by mistake." Yi Shiwen said those words in order to set up a trap for Luo Yifan, and used the resentments of other inner disciples to safeguard his own point while also directed them towards Luo Yifan. Now anyone could figure it out that the one, who gave cheat to Zhu Bingsun, in order to enhance his strength, was most probably Luo Yifan. "Shut up, you did it by mistake. You did it in front of so many elders and true disciples and you actually dare to make such irresponsible remarks. You have clearly tried to take revenge for your personal enmity with him." It was such an obvious provocation, but Luo Yifan was certainly unable to bear it, and although he did not care what these inner and outer disciples thought about him, but when he saw a red fruit kept in the trap designed by Yi Shiwen, he just had to jump, and after he realized his mistake, it made him even more aggrieved. Brother Luo's remarks are one-sided. As they say, the so-called fist has no eyes. No one can anticipate what will happen in a battle, not to mention, according to the rules of this competition, no one investigates the reasons behind someone's life and death. Did Brother Luo perhaps forget about this? Yi Shiwen shouted loudly and the fierce sound waves released from his mouth actually went straight towards Luo Yifan. The disciples immediately had dumbfounded looks on their faces and were totally stunned. They never thought that Yi Shiwen would actually dare to shout at a true disciple like Luo Yifan. This level of boldness was simply great and stunning. Chapter 141, title As far as others were concerned, Yi Zaiwen's approach could be described as too audacious and reckless. To actually shout and talk back with a true disciple, this was truly bizarre. There was difference of heaven and earth between an inner disciple and a true disciple, and even if Luo Yifan was to kill Yi Shiwen in rage, right on the spot, perhaps, the sect would not be able to do much against him. However, Luo Yifan was already dead set on killing him, and the killing intention could be seen flashing in his eyes, and it seemed as if it could burst out any time. Both sides nearly had no consideration for face anymore, although they were trying to mask their mutual hatred on the surface, but it just didn't make sense because they seemed to be afraid of themselves, that sooner or later, the conflict would erupt between the two, while at this time, Luo Yifan was planning in his heart about how to get rid of Yi Shiwen. And at this moment, Yi Zaiwen's mind was also flowing with hundreds of tricks to kill Luo Yifan, because the only way out for the two sides was, you die, I live. However, for the other disciples, they did not know the various matters. The real reason behind this situation was unknown to them. They just felt that Luo Yifan was very strange. Why would he suddenly give cheat to his man to enhance his strength? And Yi Shiwen was even stranger, that he publicly shouted and talked back with a true disciple. Didn't he want to live anymore? Of course, Yi Shiwen naturally had his own plans, because he knew that Lin Jintian was also on the high stand, and if Luo Yifan tried to attack him, then Lin Jintian would definitely rush to help him. Although Luo Yifan was strong, but so was Lin Jintian, and his strength couldn't be underestimated. Therefore, already aware of this fact, Yi Shiwen seemingly made this risky move, but was actually a safe and well-calculated move. Yi Shiwen used cleverly weaved words to shut Luo Yifan's mouth with truth, making him turn into a rude and unreasonable figure in the eyes of everyone. Bold, so you even dare to talk back with me? Luo Yifan's voice thundered from the high stand, and at the same instant, his terrifying and peerless aura came down from the high stand and firmly locked on Yi Shiwen. He felt as if the great might surged from the heaven and crashed on his body. This was the peerless might of a true disciple. It was said that a true disciple gave up affectation to some extent and strived to comprehend the true principles of the world, so they were called true, and to some extent, their coercion was not their personal strength, but it was drawn from the power of the world itself. For ordinary people, it was simply impossible to comprehend the power of the world, so how could they resist? Boom! Yi Shiwen just felt a thrill of horrifying peerless coercion crushing his body, and to fight back, he immediately actuated Zhen Yuan throughout his body. However, right then, Tianyuan mirror suddenly had a movement and released a faint bloody red light, which wrapped his body, and he felt that the horrifying peerless coercion disappeared without a trace. Yi Shiwen restrained his mind, and with a faint smile on his face, he said, "Brother Luo is highly mistaken. I was not talking back with you, rather I was just thinking that perhaps you have forgotten the sect rules, so I specifically reminded you about them." What? Luo Yifan's doubt-filled voice came from the high stand. He did not think that his peerless coercion wouldn't be able to suppress Yi Shiwen, and an embarrassing look immediately appeared on his face. Just how Yi Shiwen could so quickly and completely disregard his coercion, this boy really knew some secret ways, which made him even more determined in his heart to kill Yi Shiwen. Enough, it's correct that we do not investigate the life and death over the arena, so this matter ends here. At this time, a Taishang elder suddenly said from above the high stand. The status of a Taishang elder was loftier and nobler than other ordinary elders, and even true disciples like Luo Yifan were obedient in front of Taishang elder, and perhaps, only peerless true disciples of the level of Chief Fifan could dare to go against a Taishang elder. Yi Shiwen knew that Taishang elder was trying to smooth things over, and as a result of his interference, Luo Yifan suddenly stopped and didn't continue, which clearly displayed the gap between their strengths, because even Luo Yifan couldn't disobey the words of Taishang elder, and there was nothing he could do about it. So long as the strength was enough, it was possible that the situation would have completely turned around. In this round, Yi Shiwen wins. This was a clear victory of Yi Shiwen in this dispute, but in the process, he ended up publicly offending a true disciple, so other people were worried about him. Little brother, you talked back with a true disciple. I am afraid later, he would probably resort to any means to deal with you. Yi Feng arrived next to Yi Shiwen and said in a concerned manner. Brother, rest assured, I will be all right. He cannot reach me, so it doesn't matter even if I had an argument with him. If he wanted to kill me directly, then he would never use a roundabout way of enhancing the strength of Zhu Bingsun to kill me on the arena. Yi Shiwen explained. So that's how it is. Yi Feng hastily said in a worried voice, although he was also a proud and arrogant man, but he was not a fool to not know what kind of existences these true disciples actually were. In total, there were hundreds of thousands of inner disciples, outer disciples and core disciples in Yi Yuan school, and for all of these disciples, their ultimate goal was to strive and become a true disciple. Relax brother, I'm not some weakling. If he wants to fight, I will surely fight back. Yi Shiwen said to comfort his restless brother. Yi Zaiwen's words immediately relieved Yi Feng, although he was still somewhat worried, but he knew that his little brother suddenly changed over a year ago, from an ordinary guy with ordinary thought process into a far-sighted formidable expert, who calculated a lot of things before taking steps and rarely fought a battle where he was not sure of victory. He could make a guess that if Yi Shiwen was so confident, then he certainly had some plans. No matter what, you have to be careful. Even if Luo Yifan doesn't attack himself, he still commands a lot of experts of Fan's Hen Palace, and if they attacked, then it would be very dangerous. Yi Feng said. Don't worry brother, I have a sense of proportion. Yi Shiwen said in a calm manner because he didn't want to add too much pressure on his elder brother. Final round, Yi Shiwen, Nangong Wang. Finally, it was turn for Yi Zaiwen's last battle, which was also going to decide the champion of this year's Seed Disciple competition, and in this battle, his opponent was Nangong Wang. Nangong Wang was clad in a magnificent robe and his demeanor looked excellent, just like a handsome dandy young master of an influential clan. It was said that he belonged to an aristocratic clan of Great Yu State, named Nangong Clan, and among all of the inner disciples, he was considered the strongest and obviously at the top. In fact, even some core disciples were not his opponents. Young Yi, congratulations for having such a great advancement in your cultivation. This elder brother knows that he is not your match, but still hopes to exchange pointers with young Yi. Nangong Wang cupped his one hand into the other across his chest and said in a submissive manner. Although he confessed that he possessed inferior strength, but still maintained his elegant bearing, making it very difficult for others to have any sort of ill feeling for him. Yi Shiwen nodded and said with a smile on his face, such being the case, please begin brother Nangong Wang. For such a person, it was really hard to have even the slightest feeling of disgust. Yi Shiwen was also not an aggressive person, he was only aggressive for his enemies. He was the type who served wine for his friends, but also used shotgun if the wolves came. He was definitely not the type who would extend the right cheek if someone slapped him on the left cheek, because this was just not his style. Nangong Wang's imposing aura suddenly and completely released out, and it was even slightly better than that of Zhu Bingsun, and Yi Shiwen understood that no wonder Nangong Wang was willing to fight him. He possessed a lot of inherent strength. Even warriors of Xiantian's 6th stage were not his opponents, and it seemed that he was only a step away, because quantitative changes caused a qualitative change as well, and he only needed to take this step, then perhaps he would immediately reach the peak of Xiantian's 6th stage, and soon, he would also reach the Xiantian's 7th stage. He was definitely a very extraordinary figure, no wonder he was able to occupy the status of strongest seed disciple, and considering such a person, even Zhu Bingsun might not be his opponent. After all, someone else had used cheat to enhance Zhu Bingsun's strength, and the foundation of Nangong Wang looked quite deep and seemed like the real deal. Young Yi, be careful. Nangong Wang didn't forget to remind Yi Shiwen, and right after that, a brown-colored double-edged sword instantly rushed towards him. In a flash, the entire arena was surrounded by dust, as if a sandstorm had suddenly appeared from the desert and hit the arena. The brown-colored sword was drawing support from a concealed sandstorm, and instantly split the air, while the whole atmosphere was covered with brown-colored marks and rushed piercing towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen was well prepared and had already summoned the vigorous Jin Yuan to create a barrier to stop the sandstorm away from him, and just then, he focused Jin Yuan in his both eyes, and suddenly, his eyesight greatly increased, enough to see right through the sandstorm. Yi Shiwen did not dodge, but directly grasped his palm, which turned into a dragon claw and rapidly grasped toward the brown sword to grab it. He must defeat Nangong Wang by taking the easiest way possible, and Yi Zaiwen's best option was to force him to give up. Boom! Nangong Wang's sword severely struck towards the dragon claw of Yi Shiwen, and a violent collision occurred, causing a loud air explosion, and the pseudo-spiritual brown sword was directly caught by the dragon claw, and could not move anymore. Since Yi Shiwen had practiced tyrant body technique, it has turned his body tough to such an extent that it shocked everyone, and coupled with his hand covered with Jin Yuan, even pseudo-spiritual brown sword could inflict the slightest damage on his hand. Hoot! Nangong Wang shouted loudly, and suddenly, the entire brown sword started to make a buzzing sound, and the sandstorm instantly gathered around it, condensed into double-edged sand sword and struck towards Yi Shiwen. San! Yi Shiwen gave out a loud shout, and it seemed as if layers after layers of Jin Yuan was being released from his body, like waves rushing in ocean, and in an instant, these waves of Jin Yuan spread out and completely disintegrated the double-edged sand sword coming towards Yi Shiwen. And at this time, Yi Shiwen also increased the output of Jin Yuan in his hand and directly suppressed the rioting brown sword, and with this, he also crushed the only trace of Nangong Wang's hope in this battle. Suddenly the whole brown sword instantly quieted down and no longer resisted. It was peacefully lying down in Yi Zaiwen's hand. "Brother Nangong, let me win," Yi Shiwen said while the brown sword was still in his hand. "Thank you, young Yi, for showing mercy," Nangong Wang said, but there was a hint of bitterness hidden in his voice, cursing his own fate for this defeat. In this round, Yi Shiwen wins. This year's Seed Disciple Competition's champion is Yi Shiwen. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.